3 heartbeats flickered on the ultrasound screen where Vivian Carter expected to see only one small problem she couldn't afford to keep. Before the nurse could explain that she was carrying triplets, gunfire erupted in the clinic hallway. Armed men were hunting her, a woman whose biggest crime had been a one-night mistake at a stranger's wedding. Within the hour, she would stand before Adrian Blackwood, the East Coast's most feared crime boss, and learn that the babies growing inside her were worth more than empires. Her simple life was over. His deadly world had just begun. If you're hooked, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights in the clinic waiting room hummed with the kind of sterile indifference that matched Vivian Carter's mood perfectly. She sat with her purse clutched against her stomach, fingers worrying the frayed strap, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. The other women in the waiting area looked just as lost, just as alone. At 27, Vivian had imagined her life would look different: stable job, loving partner, maybe a small apartment that didn't smell like mildew and broken dreams. Instead, she was drowning in $30,000 of medical debt from her mother's final hospital stay, working double shifts at a diner that paid minimum wage, and now this. Pregnant. The words still felt foreign in her mouth, like a language she'd never learned to speak. It had been one night. One stupid, reckless night 6 weeks ago at her coworker's wedding reception. Too much champagne, too much loneliness, and a stranger with dark eyes who'd made her feel seen for the first time in years. She didn't even know his full name, just Adrian. He'd disappeared before dawn, leaving her with nothing but a memory that burned hotter than it should have and consequences she couldn't afford to keep. Vivian Carter? The nurse's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Vivian stood on shaking legs and followed the woman down a narrow hallway into an examination room that smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. The paper on the examination table crinkled loudly as she climbed onto it. "We'll do the ultrasound first," the nurse said, her voice professionally neutral. "Just to confirm dates and make sure everything is progressing normally before we discuss your options." Options? What a polite word for the decision tearing Vivian apart from the inside. She lay back and lifted her shirt, flinching at the cold gel spread across her abdomen. The ultrasound technician, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, positioned the wand and began moving it slowly across Vivian's skin. The room filled with the sound of static, then something else, a rapid thumping that made Vivian's chest tighten. "Okay," the technician said slowly, her brow furrowing as she adjusted the screen. "I'm just going to... Hold on a moment." Vivian's heart began to race. "What? What's wrong?" The technician didn't answer immediately. Her focus locked on the grainy black and white image. She moved the wand to a different position, then another, her expression shifting from confusion to something Vivian couldn't quite read. "Nothing's wrong," she finally said, but her voice carried a weight that contradicted the words. "Vivian, I need you to look at the screen. Do you see these 3 distinct sacs?" Vivian stared at the monitor, trying to make sense of the abstract shapes. "I don't understand." "You're carrying triplets." The world tilted sideways. Vivian's mouth went dry, her vision narrowing to a pinpoint focused on those 3 separate shadows on the screen. 3 heartbeats. 3 lives. 3 impossible futures she had no way to provide for. "That's not..." Her voice cracked. "That's not possible. Are you sure?" "I'm certain." The technician's hand was gentle on Vivian's shoulder. "I know this is a shock. Take a moment to breathe." But Vivian couldn't breathe. Her lungs felt paralyzed, her mind racing through catastrophic calculations. 1 baby had seemed impossible. 3 was beyond comprehension. The medical bills alone would bury her. The time off work, the supplies, 3 of everything. She was already barely surviving. How could she possibly... The explosion of sound shattered her panic. Gunfire. Unmistakable and terrifyingly close. Screams erupted from the waiting room, followed by the crash of furniture and harsh male voices shouting commands Vivian couldn't make out over the blood rushing in her ears. The technician's face went white. "Stay here," she hissed, but she was already moving toward the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. She never made it. The door slammed open and a man in a dark suit filled the doorframe. He wasn't young, but he moved with predatory efficiency, his hand inside his jacket where Vivian could see the outline of a weapon. His eyes swept the room and locked onto her with unsettling precision. "Vivian Carter?" Terror flooded through her veins like ice water. I don't... Who are you? You need to come with me. Now. The technician stepped between them, her voice shaking but firm. Sir, you can't be in here. I'm calling security. The man's hand emerged from his jacket, not with a gun, but with a phone. He held it up, showing the screen to the technician. Whatever she saw there drained the color from her face completely. She stepped aside without another word. Vivian's survival instincts finally kicked in. She rolled off the examination table, her hand still clutching her shirt down, and stumbled backward toward the room's second door. An emergency exit she'd noticed when she first entered. Don't run, the man said, his voice almost gentle. Mr. Blackwood just wants to talk to you. No one needs to get hurt. But Vivian was already moving. She yanked open the emergency exit and plunged into a stairwell, the alarm shrieking behind her. Her shoes slapped against concrete as she took the stairs 2 at a time, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Behind her, she heard the door crash open again and heavy footsteps pursuing. She hit the ground floor at full speed and burst through another door into a parking garage. The afternoon sun was too bright, disorienting after the artificial light inside. Vivian ran without thinking, without planning, just pure animal panic driving her forward between rows of parked cars. A black SUV screeched around the corner ahead of her, cutting off her escape. Vivian pivoted and ran the other direction, but 2 more men appeared from behind a concrete pillar. They moved like soldiers, coordinated and calm, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. She tried to scream, but one of them was faster. A hand clamped over her mouth, another arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet. Vivian thrashed and kicked, but it was useless. The man was twice her size, and within seconds she was being carried toward the waiting SUV. Carefully, one of them said sharply. Mr. Blackwood said don't hurt her. They placed her in the back seat with surprising gentleness, one man sliding in on either side of her while a third took the driver's seat. The doors locked with a heavy click that sounded like a prison cell closing. Vivian's breath came in ragged gasps, her mind screaming at her to do something, anything, but there was nowhere to go and no way to fight. The SUV pulled smoothly out of the parking garage and merged into traffic, as if nothing unusual had just happened. Where are you taking me? Vivian finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The man to her left, the one who'd first found her in the examination room, glanced at her with something that might have been sympathy. Somewhere safe. Safe? Vivian's laugh bordered on hysterical. You just kidnapped me at gunpoint. No guns were drawn, Miss Carter. His voice remained maddeningly calm. And you're not being kidnapped. You're being protected. Protected from what? He didn't answer, and the silence that followed was somehow worse than any threat could have been. The drive lasted 45 minutes, taking them out of the city and into countryside Vivian had never seen before. Massive estates began appearing behind iron gates and stone walls, each one more imposing than the last. Finally, the SUV turned onto a private road that wound through manicured grounds so vast Vivian couldn't see where they ended. The mansion that eventually appeared before them didn't look real. It was something from a movie. All modern glass and ancient stone somehow merged into an architectural statement of impossible wealth. Fountains flanked the circular driveway. Sculptures that probably cost more than Vivian would earn in her lifetime dotted the perfectly maintained lawns. The SUV stopped at the main entrance and the men escorted her out. Not roughly, but with an efficiency that made it clear resistance would be pointless. They guided her up marble steps, through massive wooden doors, and into an entrance hall that made Vivian feel smaller than she'd ever felt in her life. Wait here, one of the men said, gesturing to a sitting area furnished with antiques that belonged in a museum. Then they left her alone. Vivian stood frozen, her mind unable to process the surreal shift from the clinic's sterile walls to this overwhelming display of wealth. Her hand unconsciously moved to her stomach, where 3 impossible lives continued growing, unaware of the chaos their existence had triggered. The sound of footsteps on marble made her turn. The man walking toward her stole the breath from her lungs. She recognized him immediately, though she'd only seen him once before in dim lighting at a wedding reception 6 weeks ago. Adrian Blackwood looked different in the afternoon sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, more dangerous, more real, more absolutely terrifying in his casual control of everything around him. He was tall, perhaps 6'3", with dark hair styled with careless perfection and eyes the color of smoke before a storm. The suit he wore probably cost more than her yearly rent, fitted to emphasize a frame that suggested hours in a private gym. But it was his face that held her attention. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, and an expression of such controlled intensity that Vivian felt pinned in place by his gaze alone. Vivian. Her name in his mouth sounded different than it ever had before. Possessive, certain, weighted with meanings she didn't understand. You, she breathed, then anger flooded through her fear. You had me kidnapped. You sent armed men to a medical clinic. I sent men to protect you, Adrian interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that probably silenced boardrooms and terrified enemies. There's a difference. Protect me from what? Vivian demanded, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. I was fine until your thugs showed up. You were about to make the biggest mistake of your life. The words hit her like a physical blow. That's not your decision to make. Something flickered across Adrian's face, an emotion too quick to identify before his expression returned to that unreadable mask of control. He moved closer, close enough that Vivian caught the scent of expensive cologne and something darker underneath, something that made her pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Those children you're carrying, he said quietly, each word precisely chosen, are mine. That makes it very much my decision. Vivian took a step backward, her back hitting the wall. How did you even know? I didn't know your last name. I had no way to contact you. I've been having you watched since the night we met. The casual admission sent ice down her spine. You've been stalking me? Protecting you, Adrian corrected. Do you have any idea who I am, Vivian? What I do? She shook her head mutely, though pieces were starting to fall into terrible place. The armed men, the mansion, the way everyone seemed to fear his name. Adrian's smile held no warmth. I control most of the criminal enterprises on the East Coast. Shipping, importing, money laundering, protection services. Some people call me a businessman. Others use less polite terms. What matters is that I have enemies who would love nothing more than to discover I have a weakness. And you think You're carrying 3 children with my blood in their veins, Adrian said, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. That makes you the most valuable target in my world. And the most protected. Vivian's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. 6 weeks ago, she'd been a nobody waitress drowning in debt. Now she was standing in a crime lord's mansion, being told she was carrying his heirs. I want to leave, she said, hating how her voice shook. I want to go home right now. No. The single word was absolute, final, terrifying in its simplicity. You can't keep me here, Vivian said, though the tremor in her voice undermined her conviction. That's illegal. That's kidnapping. The law doesn't apply to men like me, Adrian said matter-of-factly. Your old life is over, Vivian. The moment you walked into that clinic planning to terminate my children, you became part of my world. And in my world, those babies represent the future of an empire worth billions. They will be born healthy and safe, raised with every advantage, protected from every threat. That is not negotiable. They're not yours to claim, Vivian said desperately. You have no right. Adrian moved so fast she didn't have time to flinch. His hand cupped her face with surprising gentleness, tilting her chin up until she had no choice but to meet his eyes. The intensity there stole her breath. Not cruelty, but something far more complex and infinitely more dangerous. I have every right, he said softly. And you will understand that soon enough. This mansion has 50 rooms. Choose any one you like. You'll have staff to attend to your every need, doctors who specialize in high-risk pregnancies, security that will keep you safer than you've ever been in your life. In return, all I ask is that you carry those children to term and allow them to be raised as they deserve. And if I refuse? Adrian's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, the gesture almost tender. You won't. Because despite your fear and anger right now, I saw something in you that night we met. You're a survivor, Vivian. You do what needs to be done to stay alive. And right now, staying alive means accepting my protection. He released her and stepped back, pulling a phone from his pocket. Elena will show you to your room. Anything you need, tell her. If you try to leave the grounds, my men will stop you. Not violently. I meant what I said about keeping you safe. But you will not leave until those children are born. Do you understand? Vivian wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything but accept this nightmare. But looking at Adrian Blackwood's implacable expression, she understood with crushing certainty that she had no power here, no choices, no escape. I understand, she whispered. Good. Adrian turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it had to be this way. In another life, perhaps things could have been different between us. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing away down the marble hall, leaving Vivian alone with her terror and the 3 tiny heartbeats that had just condemned her to a beautiful prison. A woman appeared moments later, younger than Vivian had expected, with long, dark hair and Adrian's same striking features softened into something approaching warmth. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Vivian, I'm Elena, Adrian's sister. She extended a hand. I know this must be overwhelming, but I promise we're not monsters. Come on, let me show you where you'll be staying. Vivian followed numbly, her mind still trying to process everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. Elena kept up a steady stream of pleasant conversation as they climbed a grand staircase and walked down a hallway lined with priceless artwork. Adrian can be intense, Elena said, glancing back with what seemed like genuine sympathy. But he's not cruel. He just values family above everything else. You'll see. The room Elena showed her to was larger than Vivian's entire apartment had been. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the space, surrounded by elegant furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the estate grounds. A door led to a private bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in. There's a closet through there, Elena said, gesturing. We'll have clothes brought in your size. If you need anything, books, movies, special food, just ask. You have full access to the grounds, the library, the pool. The only rule is you can't leave. Vivian sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs finally giving out. How long? Until the babies are born, Elena said gently. 6 months, maybe 7. I know it seems impossible now, but you might find it's not as terrible as you think. Adrian's world has its advantages. After Elena left, Vivian sat in silence for a long time, staring at her hands folded in her lap. She thought about the clinic, about the decision she'd been about to make, about the 3 lives growing inside her that had transformed from a problem she couldn't solve into the most valuable commodities in a crime lord's empire. She thought about her old apartment with its leaking ceiling and broken heater, about the diner where she pulled double shifts for tips that barely covered her bills, about the mountain of debt that crushed her every time she tried to imagine a future. And she thought about Adrian Blackwood's eyes when he touched her face, the gentleness in a man who commanded armies of criminals, the way her traitorous body had responded to his proximity despite everything her mind was screaming. Night fell across the estate, painting the grounds in shades of purple and gold. Vivian watched from her window as security lights flickered on, revealing the true scope of her cage. Beautiful, luxurious, and absolutely inescapable. She placed her hand on her stomach, feeling nothing yet but knowing that 3 tiny hearts were beating beneath her palm. I'm sorry, she whispered to them. I don't know how to protect you from this. I don't even know how to protect myself. But even as fear threatened to overwhelm her, a small, stubborn part of Vivian's mind began working. Adrian had called her a survivor, and he was right. She'd survived her mother's death, the crushing debt, the loneliness that had driven her into a stranger's arms for one reckless night. She would survive this too, and maybe, just maybe, she'd find a way to escape before her children became prisoners of their father's empire. The thought sustained her as she finally lay down in the too-soft bed, exhaustion pulling her towards sleep. Tomorrow she would start planning. Tomorrow she would figure out how to reclaim her freedom. But tonight, in the darkness of a mansion that felt like both a palace and a prison, Vivian Carter closed her eyes and wondered if the man who'd stolen her life away might be the only one who could keep her alive. The first week passed in a strange blur of luxury and captivity that left Vivian feeling increasingly unmoored from reality. She woke each morning in the enormous bed to find breakfast already waiting on a silver tray, fresh fruit, pastries still warm from the oven, coffee that smelled better than anything she'd ever made in her cramped apartment. A rotation of staff appeared throughout the day, always polite, always efficient, treating her like an honored guest rather than a prisoner. But the doors were still locked from the outside at night. The security cameras still tracked her movements through the hallways. And Adrian Blackwood remained a distant presence she caught glimpses of but never spoke to directly. She saw him sometimes through windows, crossing the grounds with men in dark suits following at a respectful distance. Once she spotted him in what appeared to be a home office, standing before floor-to-ceiling screens filled with numbers and data she couldn't decipher. He moved through his world with the absolute confidence of a man who'd never been told no, who'd never encountered a problem his money or power couldn't solve. Vivian spent her days exploring the mansion, testing the boundaries of her cage. The library became her favorite refuge. 3 stories of books lining mahogany shelves, with rolling ladders and reading nooks tucked into corners. She found first editions worth more than her mother's medical bills, poetry collections in languages she didn't speak, and an entire section devoted to pregnancy and child-rearing that made her stomach twist. Elena visited often, always friendly, always offering companionship that Vivian desperately wanted to trust, but couldn't quite bring herself to accept. There was something in Adrian's sister that didn't match her warm smiles, a calculation behind her eyes that set Vivian's instincts on edge. "You're looking healthier already," Elena said one afternoon, finding Vivian in the library with a book on high-risk pregnancies open in her lap. "The color's back in your face." Vivian closed the book carefully. 3 meals a day will do that. "You were struggling before." It wasn't a question. Elena settled into the chair across from her, crossing her legs with elegant ease. "Adrian showed me the reports. Your apartment, the diner, the debt. You were drowning." "Those reports were an invasion of my privacy." "Probably," Elena agreed without shame. "But my brother is thorough about things he cares about. And right now he cares very much about keeping you and those babies safe." "He cares about his heirs," Vivian corrected sharply. "I'm just the incubator." Something flickered across Elena's face. Approval, maybe, or respect. "You're smarter than Adrian expected. That's good. You'll need to be smart to survive in this world." The word sent a chill down Vivian's spine. "What do you mean, survive?" But Elena just smiled and changed the subject, asking about the books Vivian had been reading, steering the conversation into safer waters. Yet the warning lingered in the air between them like smoke. That night, Vivian couldn't sleep. She paced her room, restless and aching with the need to do something, anything, to reclaim some measure of control over her life. Around midnight, she finally gave up and slipped out into the hallway, padding barefoot across plush carpet toward the staircase. The mansion felt different at night. The daytime staff had vanished, leaving only the quiet presence of security she knew was there but couldn't see. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Vivian made her way down to the kitchen, thinking maybe warm milk would help her sleep the way her mother used to make it when Vivian was small. She was reaching for a saucepan when a voice from the doorway froze her in place. "Trouble sleeping?" Adrian stood silhouetted against the hallway light, still dressed in suit pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal surprisingly strong forearms. He looked tired, she realized, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from carrying weight no one else could see. "I didn't think you'd be awake," Vivian said, hating how her voice came out breathless. "I don't sleep much." Adrian moved into the kitchen with that same predatory grace she'd noticed before, every movement economical and controlled. "The Empire doesn't rest. Neither can I. Must be exhausting, running a criminal organization." His lips quirked in something that might have been amusement. "You'd be surprised how similar it is to running any other business. Supply chains, employee management, hostile takeovers. The main difference is how we handle competition." "You kill them," Vivian said flatly. "Sometimes." Adrian pulled down 2 mugs from a cabinet, moving around the kitchen with the ease of someone who actually knew where things were. "More often we negotiate. Death is expensive and draws attention. I prefer solutions that benefit everyone." How magnanimous. "You're angry." He poured milk into both mugs and set them in the microwave. "That's good. Anger is easier than fear." Vivian leaned against the counter, crossing her arms over her chest. "You kidnapped me, locked me in a mansion, told me I can't leave until I birth your children. What exactly should I be feeling?" "Grateful." Adrian said, and the word hung between them like a challenge. Your old life was killing you slowly. Here you have everything you need. Except freedom. Freedom is overrated when you're starving. The microwave beeped and Adrian retrieved the mugs, handing one to Vivian. I looked into your finances. In 6 months, you would have been evicted. The debt collectors were circling. Without those babies, you had nothing. The casual cruelty of his words stole her breath. You don't know anything about my life. I know everything about your life, Adrian corrected quietly. I know your mother died of ovarian cancer 18 months ago. I know the hospital bills destroyed your credit. I know you've been working 70-hour weeks trying to stay afloat and failing. I know you go to bed hungry most nights because you can't afford both rent and food. Should I continue? Vivian's hand shook, milk sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her mug. Stop. The truth hurts, Adrian said, but his voice had gentled slightly. But it's still the truth. You were drowning, Vivian. I'm offering you a life raft. A life raft with strings attached. Everything worthwhile has strings attached. They stood in silence for a moment. The only sound, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of an antique clock somewhere in the mansion's depths. Vivian studied Adrian's face in the dim light, searching for some hint of the man who'd made her laugh at that wedding reception, who'd touched her like she was precious, who'd made her feel seen for the first time in years. Why me? She finally asked. That night at the wedding, you could have had anyone. Why did you choose me? Something shifted in Adrian's expression, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. You were sitting alone at a table in the corner, watching everyone else dance. You looked sad and beautiful and completely out of place. I recognized that feeling. You're a billionaire crime lord. You can't possibly understand loneliness. Power is the loneliest thing in the world, Adrian said softly. Everyone wants something from you. Everyone fears you. No one sees you. But that night, you looked at me like I was just a man. I hadn't felt that in years. The vulnerability in his admission caught Vivian completely off guard. For a moment, she glimpsed the human being beneath the ruthless reputation. Someone just as trapped as she was, just in a different kind of cage. That doesn't make what you're doing right, she said, but the anger had drained from her voice. No, Adrian agreed, but it makes it necessary. Those children… He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. My mother abandoned me when I was 8 years old, left me with a father who saw me as a weapon to be sharpened, not a child to be loved. I built this empire from nothing, and I did it alone. Those babies you're carrying are the first family I've chosen in 30 years. I will not lose them. The raw honesty in his voice made Vivian's chest ache. She set down her mug with trembling hands. And what about me? Do I factor into this family you're building, or am I just the delivery system? Adrian stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. I haven't decided yet. How comforting. You want comfort? I'll provide it. You want honesty. He raised his hand, hesitating a moment before brushing a strand of hair back from her face. Honestly, I don't know what to do with you, Vivian Carter. You complicate things. Maybe I don't want to be uncomplicated. Maybe I'm counting on that. The air between them felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Vivian's pulse hammered in her throat as Adrian's fingers lingered against her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. She should pull away. Should remember that this man had stolen her freedom, that everything beautiful around her was just a prettier prison. But her body remembered the wedding night too, the way he'd made her feel alive and wanted and free in a way she'd never experienced before or since. This is insane, she whispered. Probably, Adrian agreed, but he didn't move away. The moment shattered when footsteps echoed in the hallway. Adrian stepped back smoothly as Elena appeared in the doorway, her expression sharp despite the late hour. Adrian, we have a problem, Dmitri called. The shipment from Rotterdam was intercepted. Adrian's entire demeanor shifted instantly from the almost tender man to the crime lord who commanded empires. When? 2 hours ago. Port Authority found the containers before our people could move them. How much did we lose? 15 million, street value, plus the buyers are demanding refunds. Adrian's jaw tightened. I'll handle it. Give me 20 minutes. Elena's gaze flickered to Vivian with something Vivian couldn't quite read, then back to her brother. Conference room? Yes. Adrian turned back to Vivian, and for just a second she saw regret in his eyes. Get some sleep. We'll continue this conversation another time. Then he was gone, Elena following, leaving Vivian alone in the kitchen with 2 mugs of cooling milk and the lingering warmth where Adrian's fingers had touched her skin. The following days brought a shift in the mansion's atmosphere. Adrian disappeared for long stretches, returning late at night with tension written in every line of his body. The staff moved with increased urgency. More security appeared on the grounds, and Elena's visits became more frequent, more probing, asking casual questions about Vivian's health, her comfort level, her relationship with Adrian. He seems distracted, Elena commented one afternoon, finding Vivian by the pool with a book she wasn't really reading. The business problems are piling up. I wouldn't know, Vivian said. I barely see him. That's probably for the best. Elena stretched out on the lounge chair beside her, perfect in a designer swimsuit that probably cost more than Vivian's car. My brother's world is dangerous right now. Better to keep your distance. But Vivian found she didn't want distance. Despite everything, despite the kidnapping, the control, the impossible situation, she caught herself listening for Adrian's footsteps in the halls, looking for glimpses of him through windows, replaying their midnight kitchen conversation in her mind until every word was memorized. It was stupid, dangerous, exactly the kind of emotional vulnerability that could destroy her, and yet she couldn't seem to stop. The breaking point came 2 weeks into her captivity. Vivian was in the library when she heard raised voices from somewhere deeper in the mansion. Curiosity overcame caution, and she followed the sound down a hallway she hadn't explored before, toward a door that stood slightly ajar. Elena's voice drifted through, sharp with anger. Getting too attached. She's a liability, Adrian. We should have just paid her off and taken the babies when they were born. That was never the plan. Adrian's voice was cold, commanding. She stays here where I can protect her. Protect her or control her? Because from where I'm standing, you're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. My judgment is fine. Is it? Because Dimitri says you turned down the Montenegro deal because it would require you to be out of the country for 3 weeks. You've never let anything interfere with business before. Silence fell, thick and dangerous. Vivian held her breath, pressed against the wall just out of sight. When Adrian finally spoke, his voice was low and lethal. What I do with my time is not your concern, Elena. Everything you do is my concern when it affects this family. That woman is nothing. A nobody from nowhere who got lucky one night. Don't mistake her for something she's not. And what do you think she is? A womb. That's all she'll ever be to you, no matter what lies you tell yourself late at night when you check on her like some lovesick. Enough. The single word cracked like a whip. Vivian flinched, her heart racing. You forget yourself, sister, Adrian continued, each word precisely measured. Vivian is under my protection. That makes her untouchable. If I hear you speak about her that way again, there will be consequences. Do you understand? Perfectly. Elena's voice dripped with false sweetness. I'll leave you to your delusions. Footsteps approached the door. Vivian barely had time to retreat around the corner before Elena emerged, her expression thunderous. She stalked past without noticing Vivian pressed into a shadowy alcove, her designer heels clicking sharply against marble. Vivian waited until the footsteps faded before releasing her held breath. Her mind reeled from what she'd overheard. Elena's barely concealed contempt. Adrian's unexpected defense. The revelation that he checked on her at night when she was sleeping. She should feel violated by that last part. Instead, warmth spread through her chest. You can come out now. Adrian's voice from inside the room made Vivian jump. He'd known she was there. Of course he had. Men like Adrian Blackwood didn't survive by being unobservant. Vivian stepped into the doorway. Adrian stood by the window, his back to her, hands in his pockets. Even from behind, she could read the tension in his shoulders. How much did you hear? He asked, without turning. Enough. Then you know my sister thinks I'm making a mistake keeping you here. Are you? Now Adrian turned, and the expression on his face stole Vivian's breath. It wasn't the cold mask of the crime lord or the controlled calculation of the businessman. It was something raw and real and frighteningly vulnerable. I don't know, he admitted, but I can't seem to make myself care about the strategic implications. Not when it comes to you. Vivian's throat tightened. Why? Because you look at me like I'm human, Adrian said simply. Everyone else sees the empire, the power, the reputation. They see what I can give them or what I can take away. You see me, and that terrifies me more than any enemy ever has. The honesty in his words cracked something open in Vivian's chest. She crossed the room before she could talk herself out of it, closing the distance between them until only a foot of charged air separated them. I'm still angry at you, she said, for taking my choices away, for treating me like property. I know. And I don't trust you, not completely. I don't expect you to. But I don't think you're a monster either. Vivian placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating hard beneath her palm. I think you're a man who's spent so long protecting himself that he's forgotten how to let anyone in. Adrian's hand covered hers, pressing it more firmly against his chest. Letting people in gets you killed in my world. Maybe, or maybe it's what makes you human enough to survive it. For a long moment, they stood there, connected by touch and truth and something neither of them could name. Then Adrian lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles with devastating tenderness. You're dangerous, Vivian Carter, he murmured against her skin. Good, she whispered back. Maybe you need someone dangerous in your life. The kiss happened inevitably, like gravity pulling them together. Adrian's mouth on hers was nothing like their first kiss at the wedding. That had been champagne and recklessness and escape. This was hunger and recognition and the terrifying acknowledgement of something real between them. Vivian melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, anchoring herself against the dizzying intensity of his touch. Adrian kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, like she was the answer to questions he'd been asking all his life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. This doesn't change anything, he said roughly. You're still staying here, still under my protection. I know, and I'm still a criminal who's done terrible things to build this empire. I know that too. Then why? Because I'm tired of being afraid, Vivian interrupted. And because maybe we're both trapped in cages of our own making. Maybe we can figure out how to be free together. Adrian pulled back slightly, searching her face. You don't know what you're saying. The danger, the enemies, the life I lead. I know I'm carrying 3 babies who will be born into this world, whether I want them to be or not, Vivian said steadily. I know running would get me killed. And I know that despite everything, when you touch me, I feel safer than I have in years. That might make me crazy, but it's the truth. But something shifted in Adrian's expression. A decision being made, a door being opened that had been locked for decades. He cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with infinite care. If we do this, he said quietly, if we try to build something real between us, it won't be easy. My world will test you in ways you can't imagine. I'm stronger than I look. I'm beginning to understand that. Adrian kissed her again, softer this time, sweet and full of promise. Stay with me, Vivian. Not because you're trapped, but because you choose to. The explosion of sound cut off her words. Glass shattered somewhere in the mansion, followed by shouts and the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Adrian's entire body went rigid, his expression transforming instantly into lethal focus. Stay here, he commanded, already moving toward the door. Lock it behind me and don't open it for anyone but me. Adrian, what's happening? But he was already gone, leaving Vivian alone as chaos erupted through the mansion like a storm. More gunfire, running footsteps, screams that made her blood run cold. Vivian's hands moved to her stomach, protective instinct overwhelming everything else. She stumbled toward the door, meaning to lock it as Adrian had ordered when Elena appeared in the hallway. Vivian, thank goodness. Elena grabbed her arm, pulling hard. We have to get you out of here. The Volkov family found out about you. They're attacking the house. Adrian said to lock the door. Adrian's handling the security breach downstairs. I'm supposed to get you to the safe room. Come on. Something in Vivian's gut screamed warning, but the sounds of violence were getting closer, and Elena was already dragging her down the hallway at a run. They burst through a service entrance Vivian had never seen before, into a narrow stairwell that led down into darkness. Where are we going? Vivian gasped, trying to keep up. Tunnel system under the estate. It leads to the garages. We'll get you out before... Elena's words cut off as they emerged into an underground garage lit by harsh fluorescent lights. But instead of cars waiting to spirit them away to safety, Vivian saw 3 men in dark tactical gear standing beside a black van. Her blood turned to ice. "Elena, what?" Elena's grip on her arm tightened painfully. When Vivian turned to look at her, Adrian's sister was smiling, a cold, triumphant expression that transformed her beautiful face into something cruel. "I'm sorry, Vivian," Elena said, though she didn't sound sorry at all. "But those babies are worth far more to my brother's enemies than they are to him. And I always did prefer the highest bidder." Vivian tried to scream, tried to fight, but one of the men was already moving forward with a cloth in his hand. The chemical smell hit her nose a second before darkness swallowed her whole. Vivian woke to the smell of rust and decay, her head pounding with a chemical fog that made thinking feel like swimming through mud. The surface beneath her was cold concrete, rough against her cheek. She tried to move and discovered her wrists were bound behind her back with zip ties that cut into her skin. Panic flooded through her system, burning away the last traces of whatever Elena had used to knock her unconscious. Vivian forced her eyes open and immediately wished she hadn't. She was in some kind of warehouse, massive and empty, except for industrial debris scattered across the floor. Broken pallets, rusted machinery, water damage staining the walls in abstract patterns that looked like old blood. High windows let in weak daylight that suggested hours had passed since the attack on the mansion. 3 men stood near the entrance, speaking in low voices. Not Elena's tactical team from the garage. These were different men, harder looking, with the casual violence of people who hurt others for a living. One of them noticed Vivian stirring and said something that made the others turn. "She's awake. Go tell Konstantin." Vivian's stomach dropped. She knew that name, had heard Adrian mention it once in a phone call she'd accidentally overheard. Konstantin Volkov, head of the Russian crime family that had been trying to move into Adrian's territory for years. The kind of man who made Adrian Blackwood look merciful by comparison. Footsteps approached from deeper in the warehouse. A man emerged from the shadows, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked hair and eyes like chips of Arctic ice. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight that mattered. "Miss Carter." His accent transformed her name into something foreign and threatening. "You are finally awake. Good. We have much to discuss." Vivian struggled to sit up, her bound hands making the movement awkward and painful. "Where am I?" "Somewhere Adrian Blackwood will never find you." Konstantin crouched down to her level, studying her face with clinical interest. "Or at least, not before we accomplish what we need to accomplish." "The babies." Vivian's voice came out as a whisper, her free hand instinctively moving to protect her stomach. "You want the babies." "Very perceptive." Konstantin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Adrian's heirs are worth a great deal to certain parties. Some want them dead, eliminating the next generation of Blackwoods before they can be born. Others want them alive as leverage. I prefer the latter option. Less messy, more profitable." "Adrian will kill you for this." "Adrian will try," Konstantin corrected. "But first he must find you, and thanks to his traitorous sister providing such detailed information about his security protocols, I am confident we have several days before his people even know where to begin looking." The casual mention of Elena's betrayal made Vivian's chest tight with fury and fear in equal measure. Why would she do this? Adrian is her brother. Family means different things to different people. Konstantin stood, looking down at her with something almost like pity. Elena has ambitions her brother does not take seriously. She believes a woman can never truly lead the Blackwood Empire while Adrian lives. This arrangement serves both our interests beautifully. You're going to help her kill him. Eventually. First, we extract maximum value from this situation. You and those babies represent $30 million in ransom, payable not by Adrian, but by his enemies who want him weakened enough to destroy. Once we have the money, we deliver you to them, and they use you to break the great Adrian Blackwood. When he is sufficiently devastated, Elena arranges for his tragic death, inherits the empire, and rewards me with control of the eastern shipping routes. Everyone wins. Except me, Vivian said through gritted teeth. Except you, Konstantin agreed without shame. But you were always just a pawn in much larger games, Miss Carter. The sooner you accept this, the easier the next few months will be. He turned to leave, and desperation made Vivian call out, "Wait, please, I need a doctor. For the babies. If something happens to them, you lose your leverage." Constantine paused, considering. "You make a valid point. I will send someone to examine you. But do not mistake pragmatism for mercy, Miss Carter. I will keep you alive only as long as you are useful. Try to escape, refuse to cooperate, or cause trouble in any way, and I will demonstrate exactly how little your life means to me. Do you understand?" Vivian nodded mutely, hating herself for the submission, but knowing she had no other choice. Constantine left, taking 2 of the guards with him. The third remained by the door, armed and alert, making it clear that any attempted escape would be futile. Alone except for her silent guard, Vivian finally let the tears come. They burned hot down her cheeks as the full horror of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She'd been kidnapped, betrayed, and sold to Adrian's worst enemy, the man she'd been starting to trust, maybe even starting to feel something deeper for, would think she'd escaped or been killed. And the 3 lives growing inside her were now bargaining chips in a war she didn't understand. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, something she'd said during those final weeks in the hospital. "You're stronger than you know, baby girl. When the world tries to break you, you bend instead. You survive." Vivian pressed her forehead against the cold concrete and forced herself to breathe. She was still alive. The babies were still alive. And somewhere out there, Adrian Blackwood was looking for her. She had to believe that. He'd defended her to Elena. He'd kissed her like she mattered. He wouldn't just abandon her to his enemies. She hoped. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. The doctor arrived eventually, a nervous man who examined her with shaking hands while a guard watched. He confirmed the baby's heartbeats were strong, gave her prenatal vitamins, and left without meeting her eyes. Vivian wondered how much Constantine was paying him to violate every oath he'd ever taken. They moved her to a small room deeper in the warehouse as night fell, cutting the zip ties and replacing them with a chain attached to a radiator that gave her enough movement to reach a bucket in the corner and a thin mattress on the floor. Someone brought food that Vivian forced herself to eat, despite her churning stomach. She needed strength, needed to stay sharp, needed to survive. The attack came at 3 in the morning. Vivian woke to the sound of gunfire, closer and louder than anything she'd heard at the mansion. Her guard rushed to the door, weapon drawn, shouting into a radio. More shots, then screams, then an explosion that shook the entire building and rained dust down from the ceiling. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. The guard spun toward the threat, but he never got a shot off. 2 men in black tactical gear appeared like shadows made solid, moving with lethal efficiency. One shot caught the guard in the chest, dropping him instantly. The second man was already crossing the room toward Vivian. She scrambled backward, terror overriding everything else, until she saw the emblem on his tactical vest. A stylized B that she recognized from paperwork she'd seen scattered around Adrian's office. "Miss Carter, we're here to extract you. Don't fight, don't run, stay close to me. Understand?" Vivian nodded frantically. The man produced bolt cutters and freed her from the chain in seconds, then handed her off to his partner while he secured the hallway. More gunfire echoed through the warehouse, controlled bursts that spoke of professional soldiers rather than panicked shooting. They moved through the building at a run, Vivian's rescuers forming a protective shell around her. Bodies littered the floor, some wearing tactical gear like Constantine's men, others in the black uniforms of Adrian's security forces. The warehouse had become a battlefield. They emerged into the loading bay where SUVs idled with engines running and doors open. Vivian was pushed into the back seat of the nearest vehicle, bracketed by armed men on either side. The door had barely closed before the driver floored the accelerator, tires screaming as they shot out into the night. "Is she hurt?" A familiar voice crackled through the radio. Adrian's voice tight with an emotion Vivian couldn't name. "Negative, sir. Minor injuries only. 3 heartbeats confirmed on the ultrasound scan earlier. Package is secure." The relief in Adrian's responding exhale was audible, even through the radio static. "Bring her home. I'll meet you there." The drive passed in a blur of adrenaline and shock. Vivian stared out the window at the passing streets, her mind unable to fully process everything that had happened. The betrayal, the warehouse, the rescue that had come with military precision. By the time they pulled through the gates of Adrian's estate, false dawn was painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. Adrian was waiting on the front steps when they arrived, looking like he'd aged a decade in the hours since Vivian had been taken. His suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and there was a cut above his left eyebrow that suggested he'd been in the thick of the fighting. But his eyes burned with an intensity that stole Vivian's breath. She barely made it out of the SUV before he was there, pulling her against his chest with a desperation that spoke louder than words. His arms wrapped around her like steel bands, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other pressed against her lower back, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I've got you," Adrian murmured against her hair, his voice rough and broken. "You're safe. I've got you." Vivian's carefully maintained composure shattered. She buried her face against his chest and sobbed, weeks of fear and confusion and impossible choices pouring out in great heaving gasps. Adrian held her through all of it, murmuring words of comfort and protection, his own body shaking with emotions he couldn't quite contain. When the storm finally passed, Vivian pulled back enough to look at his face. "Elena, I know." Adrian's expression went cold and deadly. "My men are hunting her now. She won't get far." "She sold me to Constantine. Said she wanted control of the Empire. She wanted a lot of things she'll never have now." Adrian's thumb brushed away a tear from Vivian's cheek. "I should have seen it coming. Should have protected you better. This is my fault." "You found me," Vivian said simply. "That's what matters." "I tore apart half the East Coast looking for you." Adrian's voice dropped to something raw and vulnerable. "When I realized you were gone, that she'd taken you." He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I faced down enemies, survived assassination attempts, built an empire from blood and violence. But the thought of losing you terrified me more than anything I've ever experienced." "Why?" Vivian whispered, needing to hear him say it. Adrian cupped her face in both hands, his gray eyes holding hers with burning intensity. "Because somewhere between kidnapping you and fighting to get you back, I fell in love with you, Vivian Carter. And that changes everything." The confession hung in the air between them, impossibly fragile and devastating in its honesty. Vivian's breath caught, her heart hammering against her ribs hard enough to hurt. "That's insane," she managed. "We barely know each other. This whole situation is completely—" "Insane," Adrian agreed. "But it's also true. I love you. I love the fire in you when you fight back. I love the way you see through all my carefully constructed walls. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you refuse to let my world break you, and I will burn down empires to keep you safe." Vivian's hands fisted in his shirt, anchoring herself against the emotional vertigo threatening to sweep her away. "I don't even know if I can trust these feelings. Everything's been so twisted and complicated." "I know." Adrian pressed his forehead to hers. "And I'm not asking you to love me back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I need you to know that you're not a prisoner anymore, Vivian. You're not an incubator for my heirs or a pawn in family power plays. You're the woman I love, and that means you get to choose what happens next." "Choose? Stay or go. Your decision. I'll give you money, protection, a new identity if you want it. You can disappear and raise those babies somewhere I'll never find you. Or—" his voice roughened. "Or you can stay here and let me try to build something real with you. A partnership. A family. A life that's actually worth living." The offer stole Vivian's breath. After weeks of having every choice stripped away, Adrian was handing her back her freedom. It would be so easy to run, to take the money and protection and vanish into a safer life far from the violence of his world. But when she looked at Adrian's face, scarred and dangerous and achingly vulnerable, Vivian realized she didn't want to run. Not anymore. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Of you, of this world, of everything that could go wrong. That makes two of us. And I'm still angry about the kidnapping. You can't just erase that with a love confession." "I wouldn't dream of trying." "But—" Vivian took a shaky breath. "But I think I'm falling for you too, and that scares me more than anything Constantine could have done." Adrian's expression transformed, hope and wonder breaking through the careful control he wore like armor. "Yeah? Yeah." Vivian pulled him down and kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't say into the press of her lips against his. Adrian responded with devastating tenderness, kissing her like she was precious and irreplaceable, like she was the answer to every question his broken life had ever asked. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. We're going to have to deal with the fallout from all this. Elena's betrayal, Constantine's attack, the power vacuum it creates. Things are going to get worse before they get better. I know. And my enemies will come at you harder now that they know what you mean to me. Then we'll face them together. Vivian's hand moved to her stomach, protective and fierce. These babies deserve parents who fight for them, who fight for each other. They'll have that, Adrian promised. Whatever it takes, they'll have that. He helped her into the mansion, past security teams and medical staff who'd been waiting to examine her. The doctor confirmed what Constantine's nervous physician had already established. The babies were fine, their heartbeats strong and steady despite everything their mother had endured. Vivian submitted to the examination with patience she didn't feel, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Adrian never left her side through any of it, his hand a constant anchor she clung to as the adrenaline faded and left her feeling hollowed out and fragile. They were finally alone in her room when Adrian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression went cold. "What is it?" Vivian asked. "My men found Elena." Adrian's voice was flat, emotionless. She was trying to board a plane to Monaco using a fake passport. Vivian's stomach twisted. "What are you going to do?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring at his phone screen with an expression Vivian couldn't read. Then he looked up, and the pain in his eyes made her heart ache. "She's my sister," he said quietly. "The only family I had before you and these babies. But she sold you to my worst enemy, put you and my children in mortal danger for money and power. There are consequences for that kind of betrayal." "Adrian, I won't kill her," he interrupted, seeming to read Vivian's thoughts. "That's not who I want to be anymore." "But I can't let her go unpunished either. She made her choice. Now she lives with the fallout." He made several calls in rapid succession, his voice crisp and commanding, issuing orders that would strip Elena of everything: her money, her connections, her place in the Blackwood Empire. When he finally hung up, he looked exhausted. "She'll be alive," he said to Vivian, "but she'll have nothing, no power, no resources, no way back into this world. For someone like Elena, that's worse than death." Vivian reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I'm sorry it came to this." "I'm not." Adrian's grip tightened. "She showed me who she really was. Better to know now than to keep trusting someone who would destroy everything I care about for her own ambition." He climbed into bed beside Vivian without asking, pulling her against his chest with careful tenderness. She went willingly, too tired to maintain any pretense of distance, needing his warmth and solidity to chase away the lingering shadows of the warehouse. "Sleep," Adrian murmured against her hair. "I'll keep watch. Nothing's going to hurt you while I'm breathing." Vivian believed him. Against all logic and reason, she trusted this dangerous man to keep her safe. Her eyes drifted closed as Adrian's steady heartbeat lulled her toward unconsciousness. She was almost asleep when his phone rang again. Adrian answered it with a curse, his body going rigid against hers. "When?" His voice was sharp, dangerous. A pause. "How many of them?" Vivian forced her eyes open, dread pooling in her stomach at Adrian's expression. "Secure the perimeter. I want triple guards on every entrance. Nobody gets in or out without my personal authorization." He hung up and met Vivian's frightened gaze. "We have another problem." "What kind of problem?" "My mother just arrived at the front gate," Adrian said grimly. "And she's not alone." The words sent ice through Vivian's veins. She'd heard Adrian mention his mother exactly once, the woman who'd abandoned him when he was 8 years old, leaving him to be raised by a father who treated him like a weapon. The woman whose absence had shaped Adrian into the man he'd become. "Why is she here?" Vivian whispered. Adrian's expression was harder than she'd ever seen it. "Because news of my heirs has spread further than I anticipated, and because my mother has always had impeccable timing when it comes to exploiting weakness." He stood, already pulling his phone out to make more calls, his voice shifting back into the cold command of the crime lord who'd built an empire on ruthlessness and control. Vivian watched him pace the room, issuing orders and demanding updates, and understood with crushing clarity that the danger was far from over. Elena's betrayal had been a symptom of something larger, a crack in the foundation of Adrian's empire that his enemies were already moving to exploit. And now his mother, a woman who'd proven decades ago that family meant nothing to her, had appeared at exactly the wrong moment. Vivian's hand moved to her stomach, protective instinct overwhelming everything else. 3 tiny lives depended on her survival, on her ability to navigate the deadly waters of Adrian's world. She couldn't afford to be just a victim anymore, couldn't afford to wait for others to protect her. If she was going to survive this, if her babies were going to survive this, she needed to become something more than the struggling waitress who'd stumbled into a crime lord's bed. She needed to become someone who could stand beside Adrian Blackwood as an equal, someone who could fight for her children with the same ruthless determination he brought to protecting his empire. The thought terrified her, but it also crystallized something inside her chest, hardening her resolve into something sharp and unbreakable. Adrian ended his call and turned back to her, reading something in her expression that made him pause. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. Vivian met his eyes, letting him see the steel beneath her fear. "I'm thinking that I'm done being the damsel who needs rescuing. If we're going to do this, build a life together, raise these children, survive whatever's coming, then I need you to teach me how your world works, the real rules, the actual dangers, everything." Adrian studied her for a long moment, something like pride flickering across his features. "That's not a decision you should make when you're exhausted and traumatized. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Vivian stood, closing the distance between them. "Your mother is downstairs. Your empire is under attack. And I'm carrying 3 babies who are targets before they're even born. I can either hide in this room and hope you protect me from everything, or I can learn to protect myself. Which do you think has a better chance of keeping me alive?" Adrian's lips quirked in something that might have been a smile if the situation weren't so dire. "You're remarkable. You know that? I'm terrified and desperate and absolutely done with being helpless. That's not remarkable. It's survival." "Then we'll start your education tomorrow," Adrian said. "Right now I need to deal with my mother, and you need rest. I'm coming with you." "Vivian, if she's here because of the babies, then she needs to see that I'm not some fragile flower who'll wilt under pressure. We present a united front or we show weakness. You taught me that, didn't you? In your world, perception is everything." Adrian looked at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "All right. But you stay close to me. If anything feels wrong, you leave immediately. Understood?" "Understood." They descended the grand staircase together, Adrian's hand a steady presence at the small of Vivian's back. Security personnel lined the hallways, more than Vivian had ever seen before, all armed and alert. The mansion felt like a fortress preparing for siege. The woman waiting in the main sitting room stole Vivian's breath with her severe beauty. She had Adrian's sharp cheekbones and commanding presence, though age had softened her features into something almost regal. She wore designer clothes that screamed old money and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. But her eyes were cold calculation wrapped in maternal warmth, and they fixed on Vivian with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Adrian, darling," the woman's voice was honey over razor blades, "you've grown into such a formidable man, your father would be proud." "My father is dead," Adrian said flatly. "And you lost the right to call me darling when you walked out 30 years ago. Why are you here, Catherine?" Catherine's smile never wavered. "Is that any way to greet your mother? Especially when I've come all this way to meet the woman carrying my grandchildren." Her gaze slid to Vivian, assessing and dismissive in equal measure. Vivian felt pinned under that scrutiny, reduced to component parts and found wanting. "3 babies," Catherine continued, her voice rich with false delight. "What a blessing. And what a tremendous responsibility for someone so—" She paused delicately. "Unprepared." "Vivian is perfectly capable," Adrian said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "Of course she is, darling. But raising the heirs to the Blackwood Empire requires more than capability. It requires breeding, connections, understanding of how our world operates." Catherine's smile sharpened. "Things that can't be taught overnight to someone from such humble origins." Vivian felt Adrian tense beside her, preparing to defend her, but she spoke first. "You're right," she said calmly, meeting Catherine's cold gaze without flinching. I don't have breeding or connections. I was a waitress drowning in debt before your son decided I was important enough to protect. But I have something you clearly don't. I would never abandon my children for power or money or whatever made you walk away from an 8-year-old boy who needed his mother. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Catherine's expression flickered. Surprise, then anger, then grudging respect. Spirited, she said. I can see why you're drawn to her, Adrian. But Spirit won't protect her from what's coming. Or are you going to pretend the Volkov family won't retaliate for Konstantine's losses? That the other families won't see your divided attention as weakness? Your enemies are circling, darling, and she's the bleeding wound drawing them closer. Then I'll kill every single one of them, Adrian said with terrifying calm. Anyone who threatens Vivian or my children dies. That's not a threat, Mother. It's a promise written in blood. Catherine laughed, the sound utterly devoid of warmth. Still so dramatic. You always were the theatrical one, but we both know you can't protect her forever, not when you're spread so thin trying to hold an empire together. So I'm here to offer a solution. I don't want your solutions. You'll want this one. Catherine leaned forward, her expression shifting into something almost genuine. Let me take the children when they're born. I'll raise them properly, give them the education and connections they need to truly lead this empire. You can visit whenever you like, maintain your relationship with them. And Miss Carter can return to whatever life she chooses, compensated handsomely for her service as a surrogate. The audacity of the proposal stole Vivian's breath. Adrian's hand tightened on her back, the only sign of his fury. Get out, he said quietly. Adrian, be reasonable. Get out of my house before I have my men throw you out. Adrian's voice was soft and absolutely lethal. And if you ever suggest taking my children from their mother again, I will end you, blood relation or not. Catherine stood gracefully, smoothing her skirt. You're making a mistake. When this all falls apart, and it will fall apart, darling, don't come crying to me for help. She swept toward the door, then paused to look back at Vivian. Enjoy your fairy tale while it lasts, dear. But remember, in our world, happy endings are just intermissions before the real tragedy begins. Then she was gone, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and veiled threats. Adrian's entire body was vibrating with suppressed rage. Vivian reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. I'm okay, she said quietly. She can't hurt me with words. She'll try with more than words. Adrian pulled Vivian against him, his embrace almost crushing. My mother doesn't make social calls. She's planning something, and whatever it is, it's going to be worse than Elena's betrayal. Vivian held him tighter, feeling the tremors running through his powerful frame. Then we'll face it together, just like everything else. But even as she said the words, fear curled cold in her stomach, because Catherine Blackwood hadn't looked like a woman making idle threats. She'd looked like a woman who already had a plan in motion, who'd come to the mansion not to negotiate, but to observe her pieces on a chessboard only she could see. And Vivian had the terrible feeling that they were all already 3 moves behind. The weeks following Catherine's visit transformed the mansion into something between a fortress and a war room. Adrian doubled security, installed new surveillance systems, and began teaching Vivian the brutal realities of his world with a thoroughness that left her exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. She learned to read the subtle signals his men used to communicate threats, learned which families could be trusted and which were waiting for any sign of weakness to strike. Learned that power in Adrian's world wasn't about violence. It was about knowing exactly when to deploy violence and when to choose mercy for maximum strategic advantage. The Castellanos are reaching out, Adrian said one evening, spreading surveillance photos across his desk, while Vivian studied them from her position curled in the leather armchair nearby. Her pregnancy was starting to show now, a gentle swell beneath the designer clothes Adrian insisted on buying her. They want to negotiate a truce. After they backed Constantine's play against you? Vivian's education had progressed enough that she understood the implications. That's bold. That's survival. Adrian's finger tapped one of the photos, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. Marco Castellano is smart enough to know Constantine's arrest left a power vacuum. He's offering alliance before someone more aggressive fills that space. Do you trust him? I don't trust anyone. Adrian glanced up, then corrected himself. Except you. The simple admission still had the power to steal Vivian's breath even after weeks of growing closer. They'd fallen into a routine that felt almost domestic despite the constant undercurrent of danger. Breakfast together when Adrian's schedule allowed, evenings spent in his office while he worked and she read, nights tangled together in bed where he touched her with reverence that made her feel precious and protected. But the shadow of Catherine's visit hung over everything like a storm that refused to break. "Your mother's been quiet," Vivian said, voicing the concern that had been gnawing at her. "Too quiet." Adrian's expression darkened. "I know. My people are tracking her movements, but she's being careful. No obvious meetings with my enemies, no financial transactions that raise flags. She's planning something, but I can't figure out what. Maybe she gave up." "Catherine doesn't give up. She waits." Adrian stood and crossed to where Vivian sat, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. His hand settled protectively over her rounded stomach, feeling for the movement that had become more frequent as the babies grew. "She's never wanted anything to do with me until now. The timing isn't coincidence." Vivian leaned into his warmth, letting herself draw strength from his solid presence. "We'll figure it out. Whatever she's planning, we'll handle it." "When did you become the optimistic one?" Adrian's lips brushed her temple, soft and achingly tender. "When I realized being terrified all the time was exhausting." Vivian tilted her head back to meet his eyes. "And when I started trusting that you actually know what you're doing." "Dangerous assumption." "Maybe. But you haven't let me down yet." Adrian kissed her then, deep and searching, pouring emotion into the contact that he still struggled to voice. Vivian responded with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, anchoring herself against the dizzying feeling that swept through her every time he touched her like this. Like she was the most important thing in his carefully controlled universe. They were still wrapped around each other when Adrian's phone buzzed. He pulled back with a curse, glancing at the screen, then his entire body went rigid. "What?" Vivian asked, alarm spiking through her. "Security breach at the East Gate. 3 vehicles approaching fast." Adrian was already moving, grabbing the gun he kept in his desk drawer and checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. "Get to the safe room, now." "Adrian? Now, Vivian." His voice cracked like a whip, leaving no room for argument. "This isn't a discussion." But before Vivian could move, the French doors leading to the garden exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. Men in tactical gear poured through the opening, weapons raised, moving with military precision that suggested extensive training. Adrian fired twice, dropping the first man through the door, then threw himself in front of Vivian as return fire tore chunks from the desk and walls. He dragged her down behind the heavy oak desk, his body covering hers, protecting her and the babies with his own flesh. "Stay down," he growled, then raised his head and fired again. Another attacker fell, but more were coming, too many to fight off alone. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs, terror threatening to overwhelm her. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, a fierce protectiveness for the lives growing inside her and the man shielding her body with his own. She couldn't just lie here helpless while Adrian fought for their survival. Her hand closed around the letter opener on Adrian's desk. Heavy brass, sharp enough to do damage if she could get close enough. It wasn't much, but it was something. She pulled it free and gripped it tight, waiting for an opening. Adrian's security team burst into the room from the hallway, engaging the attackers in a firefight that turned the elegant office into a war zone. Adrian seized the opportunity to pull Vivian to her feet and half-drag her toward the door, using his body as a shield between her and the bullets still flying. They made it into the hallway when a figure stepped out from a side corridor, blocking their escape. The man was older, scarred, with the cold eyes of someone who'd killed enough times that it no longer registered as significant. His weapon was already trained on Adrian's chest. "Mr. Blackwood," the man said calmly over the sounds of combat. "Mrs. Volkov sends her regards." Vivian's blood turned to ice. Mrs. Volkov, Konstantine's mother, the matriarch of the family that Adrian had destroyed when he rescued Vivian from the warehouse. This wasn't a random attack. This was revenge. Adrian's grip on Vivian tightened, his mind clearly calculating angles and odds. Irina Volkov is 80 years old and supposedly retired. I'm surprised she still has the reach to coordinate something like this. "You killed her son," the man said simply. "Did you think there would be no consequences?" Constantine died resisting arrest by federal agents, Adrian corrected. I had nothing to do with it. You put him in position to be arrested. You destroyed his operation. The blood is on your hands regardless of who pulled the trigger. The man's weapon never wavered. Mrs. Volkov wants you to understand loss the way she understands it. She wants you to watch everything you love burn before she grants you the mercy of death. Adrian's laugh was cold and utterly without humor. Then she's going to be disappointed. Because I'm not dying today, and neither is anyone I love. He moved faster than Vivian could track, yanking her sideways and firing simultaneously. The attacker's shot went wide, punching into the wall where Vivian's head had been a second earlier. Adrian's aim was perfect. The man dropped with a hole in his forehead, dead before he hit the ground. But the motion had exposed Adrian's side, and another attacker Vivian hadn't seen was already firing from the far end of the hallway. Adrian jerked as the bullet caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him around. He stayed on his feet through sheer force of will, still keeping himself between Vivian and danger. Adrian! Vivian's scream tore from her throat. I'm fine! Move! He pushed her through the nearest door into what turned out to be a linen closet, following and slamming the door behind them. His left arm hung useless, blood soaking through his shirt in an expanding stain that made Vivian's stomach drop. You're not fine, you're bleeding. Flesh wound. Missed the bone. Adrian was already pulling out his phone with his good hand, texting rapid commands. Extraction team is 2 minutes out. We just need to stay alive that long. The door shuddered as someone hit it from outside. Once, twice, then the distinctive sound of a battering ram. The lock wouldn't hold much longer. Adrian raised his weapon, his hand steady despite the blood loss. When that door opens, you run for the window at the end of the hall. Don't look back. Don't stop. My people will find you. I'm not leaving you. Vivian, no. She gripped the letter opener tighter, positioning herself beside him instead of behind him. We survive this together, or not at all. Adrian looked at her, something raw and fierce blazing in his eyes. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. You love me for it. I do. He kissed her hard and fast, more than you know. The door exploded inward. Adrian fired immediately, dropping the first attacker through the opening. Vivian struck out with the letter opener as another man lunged for her, catching him in the neck in a spray of hot blood that made her stomach heave. The man fell, clutching his throat, and Vivian stumbled backward in shock at what she'd just done. Adrian was still firing, but his movements were getting slower, his left side drenched in blood now. They were going to be overrun. Too many attackers, not enough ammunition, and nowhere left to run. Then the cavalry arrived. Adrian's security team hit the attackers from behind in a coordinated assault that turned the tide instantly. The remaining men in tactical gear tried to retreat but were cut down with ruthless efficiency. Within 30 seconds, the hallway was silent, except for the ringing in Vivian's ears and her own ragged breathing. Marcus, Adrian's head of security, appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with professional calm despite the carnage. Sir, we need to get you to medical. You're losing too much blood. Vivian first, Adrian said, already swaying on his feet. Make sure she's... He didn't finish the sentence before his legs gave out. Vivian caught him as he collapsed, or tried to. His weight pulled them both down to the floor. She cradled his head in her lap, pressing her hands against the bullet wound to slow the bleeding while terror clawed at her throat. Adrian, stay with me. Please stay with me. His eyes were already glassy with shock, but he managed to focus on her face. The babies are fine. I'm fine. But you need to stay conscious. Do you hear me? Don't you dare leave me now. Adrian's hand found hers, gripping with surprising strength. Love you, he mumbled. Should have said it more. You'll have years to say it, Vivian said fiercely, tears streaming down her face. You're not dying in a hallway. I won't let you. Marcus was already coordinating with the medical team Adrian kept on permanent standby. They appeared with a stretcher and emergency equipment, working with practiced efficiency to stabilize him enough for transport. Vivian refused to let go of Adrian's hand through all of it, staying close even when they loaded him into an ambulance for the drive to the private medical facility Adrian used for situations like this. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of sterile waiting rooms and hushed medical consultations. The bullet had torn through muscle and nicked an artery, requiring emergency surgery to repair the damage. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but the blood loss had been severe. The next 24 hours would be critical. Vivian sat in a chair by Adrian's bedside in the ICU, still wearing clothes stained with his blood, and watched the monitors track his vital signs with mechanical precision. Her hands rested on her stomach, feeling the babies moving inside her, active and healthy, blissfully unaware of how close they'd come to losing their father before they were even born. "You can't leave us," she whispered to Adrian's unconscious form. "We need you. I need you. Please fight. Please come back." Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted. "Miss Carter, you should rest. Let me get you cleaned up, some food. I'm not leaving him. Adrian would want you to take care of yourself. For the babies. Adrian would want me exactly where I am." Vivian's voice was steady despite the tears still sliding down her cheeks. "What happened to the attackers?" "The ones who survived are being questioned. We've confirmed Irina Volkov ordered the hit. She's currently in Moscow, protected by the Russian government. We can't touch her there. But she can keep sending people after us." Marcus's silence was answer enough. Vivian stared at Adrian's pale face, at the tubes and wires connecting him to machines that were keeping him alive, and felt something hard and cold crystallize in her chest. Irina Volkov wanted revenge for her son. Fine. But if she thought Adrian was the only one capable of ruthless retaliation, she was about to learn a very painful lesson. "I want everything you have on her," Vivian said quietly. "Financial records, known associates, properties she controls. Everything." Marcus studied her with new assessment. "Miss Carter, I'm carrying the next generation of the Blackwood family," Vivian interrupted, her voice harder than she'd ever heard it. "That makes me a target whether I hide in this hospital room or take action. I'd rather be the one choosing how this plays out, so either help me or stay out of my way." A slow smile spread across Marcus's scarred face. "Adrian said you were tougher than you looked. I'm beginning to see what he meant." Over the next 3 days, while Adrian drifted in and out of consciousness, Vivian educated herself on Irina Volkov with single-minded intensity. The woman was old-world Russian mafia, brutal and traditional, with connections that spanned continents. She'd built her power by being more vicious than the men around her, carving out territory with calculated violence that left her enemies too terrified to retaliate. But everyone had weaknesses, and Vivian found Irina's buried in financial records that suggested the matriarch had been quietly funneling money out of her organization for years, not for retirement, but to fund a legitimate business empire under her daughter's name. A daughter who wanted nothing to do with the family's criminal activities and was trying to build a clean life in London. It was the kind of information that could destroy Irina's reputation with the traditionalists who followed her, who would see protecting a daughter's innocence as weakness rather than maternal love. It was also the kind of leverage that could end a war before more people died. Vivian was still studying the documents when Adrian finally woke, his eyes focusing on her with gratifying clarity. "You look terrible," he rasped, his voice rough from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. Vivian's laugh was half sob. She pressed her lips to his forehead, his cheeks, his mouth, careful not to jostle any of the medical equipment, but needing to touch him to confirm he was real and alive and back with her. "You got shot protecting me," she said when she could speak again. "You don't get to criticize my appearance." "Fair enough." Adrian's good hand found hers, squeezing weakly. "The babies? Perfect. Moving around like tiny acrobats. They're going to be handful. They're yours. Of course they are." Adrian's eyes tracked to the documents spread across the table beside his bed. "What are you working on?" Vivian hesitated, then decided he deserved the truth. "Ending the war with Irina Volkov before she sends more people to kill us." Adrian's expression sharpened despite his weakened state. "Vivian, that's not your responsibility." "It absolutely is my responsibility," she interrupted. "Those attackers came for all of us. You almost died. Our children are targets before they're even born. So either we wait for Irina to strike again, or we take the fight to her first." "I choose the latter." She explained what she'd found, watching Adrian's face shift from concern to reluctant approval as he absorbed the implications. "You want to threaten her daughter," he said when she finished. "Force Irina to back down or watch her carefully constructed legitimate empire crumble." "I want to give her a choice," Vivian corrected. "She can accept that Constantine died because he made stupid decisions, Or she can watch everything she's built for her daughter burn while we systematically dismantle her organization from the inside out. Either way, the attacks stop. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made Vivian's pulse quicken. When I first took you from that clinic, you were terrified and angry and completely lost. Now you're plotting strategy that would make most of my advisors nervous. What happened to you? I fell in love with a crime lord, Vivian said simply. And I decided that if I'm going to survive in your world, I need to stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like a partner. Adrian pulled her down for a kiss that was gentle but no less devastating for its tenderness. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. They implemented the plan 2 days later when Adrian was strong enough to participate via video conference from his hospital bed. Vivian delivered the message to Irina Volkov herself, speaking calmly and clearly while Adrian's people transmitted evidence of her daughter's business dealings and exactly how exposed they would be if certain information reached the right ears. Irina's face on the screen was stone, but Vivian saw the flash of fear in her eyes when she understood what was at stake. You would destroy an innocent woman to save your own skin, Irina said, her accent thick with contempt. I would protect my family by any means necessary, Vivian corrected, just like you tried to protect yours by sending assassins after us. The difference is, I'm giving you a choice to end this peacefully. You didn't extend us the same courtesy. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Finally, Irina spoke. The debt is paid. My son is avenged by the blood already spilled. There will be no further action against the Blackwood family. And if you're lying, Irina's smile was cold and sharp as a knife, then you will prove yourself more ruthless than I gave you credit for, and my daughter will suffer for my mistakes. I am many things, Miss Carter, but I am not a fool. We have an understanding. The screen went dark. Vivian released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her whole body trembling with reaction now that the confrontation was over. Adrian reached for her hand, pride and something deeper shining in his eyes. You just negotiated a truce with one of the most dangerous women in the Russian Mafia, while pregnant with triplets, and you did it without flinching. I was flinching on the inside, Vivian admitted. Could have fooled me. Adrian pulled her closer, careful of his shoulder. You're going to be an incredible mother and an absolutely terrifying partner in this empire. Is that a promotion? That's a recognition of what you already are. Adrian's expression grew serious. When those babies are born, I want you by my side in every decision, not as my kept woman or the mother of my heirs, but as my equal. Someone who understands the stakes and has the spine to make hard choices. The offer stole Vivian's breath. In Adrian's world, power wasn't given lightly. By offering to share authority over his empire, he was giving her something more valuable than love. He was giving her respect. Ask me again when you're not on pain medication, Vivian said, but her voice was thick with emotion. I'll ask you every day until you say yes. Adrian was released from the hospital a week later, his shoulder healing well but still requiring physical therapy. They returned to the mansion to find it transformed into something even more secure than before. New surveillance systems, expanded security teams, and reinforced safe rooms that could withstand anything short of a military assault. But the greatest change was invisible. The way Adrian's people now looked at Vivian with respect rather than pity. The way other families approached her at the negotiating table as a power in her own right. The way she'd stopped being just the woman carrying Adrian Blackwood's children and become someone to be reckoned with. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the following weeks, Vivian's body adapting to carrying 3 lives with surprising resilience. Adrian was constantly attentive, cutting back on business travel to stay close, attending every doctor's appointment, reading books on fatherhood with an intensity he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. They were having dinner one evening when Vivian felt the first contraction, a tightening across her abdomen that made her drop her fork. Adrian was on his feet instantly. What's wrong? I think... Another contraction hit, stronger this time. I think it's time. The next 12 hours were a blur of pain and fear and overwhelming medical intervention. Carrying triplets meant complications, required a team of specialists and monitoring equipment that turned the private birthing suite into something resembling mission control. Adrian never left her side, holding her hand through contractions, murmuring encouragement when she wanted to give up, being her anchor in a storm of overwhelming sensation. "You can do this," he said for the 100th time, his voice steady even though his eyes showed his terror. "You're the strongest person I know. Just a little longer." "I can't." Vivian gasped as another contraction peaked. "It's too much." "Yes, you can. Look at me, Vivian. Look at me." She forced her eyes to his face, finding strength in the absolute conviction she saw there. "You negotiated with Russian Mafia bosses," Adrian said fiercely. "You survived kidnapping and assassination attempts. You turned yourself into a force to be reckoned with in one of the most dangerous worlds imaginable. You can absolutely do this." The delivery doctor appeared between her legs, his voice calm and professional. "Okay, Vivian, I need you to push now. Big push. Let's meet your first baby." Vivian bore down with everything she had, Adrian's hand gripping hers so tight it should have hurt but instead felt like the only thing keeping her tethered to earth. The pressure was enormous, impossible. Surely her body couldn't... And then a cry split the air, tiny and furious and absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, placing the squirming infant on Vivian's chest for a brief moment, before whisking him away to be checked and cleaned. Vivian barely had time to process the overwhelming rush of love before another contraction hit. "Already?" "Babies don't wait for anyone," the doctor said with a slight smile. "Ready for number 2? The second baby, another boy, arrived 10 minutes later with the same furious cry as his brother. And 15 minutes after that, their sister made her entrance into the world, smaller than her brother's but with lungs that suggested she'd have no trouble making herself heard. When it was finally over, when all 3 babies had been checked and declared healthy and were wrapped in blankets being held by nurses, Vivian lay back against the pillows feeling utterly destroyed and completely triumphant. Adrian kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You're incredible. They're incredible. I don't have words for what I'm feeling right now." "Try anyway," Vivian said, exhausted but needing to hear it. "Grateful. Terrified. Overwhelmed. More in love with you than I knew it was possible to be." Adrian's voice cracked slightly. "You gave me a family, Vivian. You gave me something worth protecting that isn't built on violence and fear. You gave me hope." The nurses brought the babies over, helping Vivian position them for their first feeding. 2 boys and a girl, each one perfect and impossible and theirs. Adrian sat beside her on the bed, one arm carefully around her shoulders, his free hand gently touching each tiny head with reverence that made Vivian's heart ache. "What should we name them?" she asked softly. They'd discussed names before but never quite decided. Now, looking at 3 actual faces instead of abstract possibilities, Vivian found herself at a loss. Adrian was quiet for a moment, studying each baby in turn. "James," he finally said, indicating the firstborn. "After my grandfather, the only family member who ever showed me kindness before he died." His finger moved to the second boy. "And Lucas, because it means light. Something I didn't have much of before you." "And her?" Vivian looked at their daughter, the smallest of the 3, but somehow already the most determined looking. "That's your choice," Adrian said. "I picked the boys. You pick our daughter." Vivian studied the tiny face, seeing traces of herself mixed with Adrian's features in a combination that stole her breath. "Grace," she decided, because despite everything we went through, somehow we found grace in the chaos. "Grace," Adrian repeated, testing the name. "It's perfect. They're all perfect." But even as they sat there in their bubble of new parent joy, Vivian caught the tension in Adrian's shoulders, saw how his eyes kept tracking to the door as if expecting threats. "She's still out there," Vivian said quietly, knowing he'd understand she meant Catherine. "Your mother, she never came back after that first visit." "I know." Adrian's expression hardened slightly. "Marcus has people watching her, but she's been quiet. Too quiet. Like she's waiting for something." "For what?" "I wish I knew." The answer came 3 days later when they were preparing to take the babies home from the hospital. Vivian was in the bathroom getting dressed when she heard raised voices from the main room. She emerged to find Adrian in a tense standoff with someone Vivian couldn't see past his protective stance. Then Catherine's voice cut through, honey-sweet and poisonous. "Surely you'll let a grandmother meet her grandchildren, Adrian. I've come all this way. Adrian's hand was inside his jacket where Vivian knew he kept a weapon. You have 30 seconds to leave before I have security remove you. Don't be dramatic, darling. I just want to see the babies. No. They're my blood as much as yours. You gave up any claim to family 30 years ago. Adrian's voice was ice. Those children have a grandmother who cares about them. Vivian's mother might be dead, but her memory matters more than your living presence ever will. Catherine's laugh was brittle. How noble! But I'm not here to argue parental rights. I'm here to make you an offer. Not interested. You will be. Catherine finally came into view, moving around Adrian to look at where Vivian stood holding Grace while James and Lucas slept in their bassinets. Her expression softened into something that might have been genuine emotion. They're beautiful. You did well, Miss Carter. Get away from them, Vivian said quietly, her arms tightening around her daughter. I'm not a threat to them, Catherine said. In fact, I'm here to ensure their safety. You see, word is spread that Adrian Blackwood has softened, that he's distracted by domesticity, vulnerable in ways he never was before. Your enemies are gathering, darling, and when they strike, and they will strike, those babies will be their primary targets. I can protect my own family, Adrian said through gritted teeth. Can you? Because I count at least 5 major families positioning themselves to move against you in the next 6 months. The Castellanos are demanding concessions you can't afford to give. The New York syndicates are pushing into your territory, and the federal investigation into your shipping operations is getting closer every day. You're spread too thin, Adrian. You need help. I don't need anything from you. Pride is expensive. Catherine's eyes met Vivian's, and there was something almost like sympathy there. I made mistakes with you, Adrian. I was young and stupid, and I chose power over family. But I'm offering you a chance to not repeat those mistakes. Let me help secure your empire so you can focus on being a father to those children. Real help, not schemes or power plays. I want to be part of this family again. The offer hung in the air, heavy with possibility and danger. Vivian studied Catherine's face, searching for deception, but all she saw was a woman who looked tired and alone and maybe possibly genuinely regretful. No, Adrian said flatly, but Vivian heard the hesitation beneath the word. Adrian, she said quietly, maybe we should hear her out. His head whipped toward her, betrayal flashing across his features. You can't be serious. I'm serious about protecting our children by any means necessary, Vivian said steadily. If she's right about enemies gathering, we need to know. And if she's offering genuine help, we'd be stupid to refuse it just because of old wounds. She abandoned me, and that was unforgivable, Vivian interrupted. But our children deserve every possible advantage, every layer of protection. Your pride isn't worth their safety. The words hit Adrian like physical blows. He stared at Vivian for a long moment, something crumbling in his expression, before turning back to Catherine. One chance, he said harshly. You prove yourself useful. You get supervised access to the children. You betray us in any way, scheme against us, try to manipulate this situation, and I will end you myself, family or not. Do you understand? Catherine's smile was tremulous but genuine. I understand. Thank you, Adrian. You won't regret this. I already regret it, he muttered, but he stepped aside to let her approach the babies. Vivian watched Catherine's face transform as she looked down at the sleeping boys and the alert girl in Vivian's arms. The hardness melted away, leaving behind something vulnerable and achingly human. They have your eyes, Catherine whispered to Adrian. All 3 of them. They have Vivian's stubbornness, Adrian said, but his voice had softened slightly. That's the trait that matters. Over the following weeks, Catherine proved herself surprisingly useful. She had connections Adrian had lost when she left, old loyalties she'd maintained, and information about rival families that proved invaluable in fortifying Adrian's position. Slowly, carefully, she integrated herself into the family structure, not as a mother to Adrian, that bridge had burned too thoroughly, but as an ally, a resource, and eventually a grandmother who seemed genuinely devoted to the triplets. But Vivian never fully trusted her. She watched Catherine with the same careful assessment she'd learned to apply to everyone in Adrian's world, waiting for the inevitable betrayal. It came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the babies were 2 months old. Vivian had just put Grace down for a nap when she heard voices from Adrian's office that made her pause outside the door. Catherine's voice, low and urgent, speaking to someone on a phone call. The transfer needs to happen within the week. Yes, I understand the risk. But if we don't move now, Adrian will figure out what we're planning. Vivian's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against the wall, every instinct screaming that she was about to hear something that would shatter the fragile peace they'd built. No, he trusts me now. Or at least he's stopped watching me so closely. Vivian vouched for me. That was the key. Once I had her support, everything else fell into place. Vivian's hands clenched into fists. She'd been played. The whole apologetic grandmother routine had been an act, and she'd fallen for it completely. The children are the leverage we need, Catherine continued. With them under our control, Adrian will have no choice but to… What? No, I'm not backing out now. We've come too far. Just make sure the team is ready to move when I give the signal. The call ended. Vivian heard Catherine's footsteps approaching the door and barely had time to step back into a side hallway before she emerged. Catherine passed without noticing her, heading toward the nursery where the babies slept. Vivian's mind raced. She could confront Catherine now, but without proof it would be her word against a woman who'd spent weeks building credibility. She needed evidence, needed to know exactly what Catherine was planning before she could stop it. She pulled out her phone and texted Marcus with shaking hands. Catherine is planning something. Activate full surveillance on her, now. His response was immediate. Already on it. Adrian suspected. We've been monitoring. Relief flooded through Vivian, followed immediately by anger. You let me bring her into this family knowing she was a threat? We needed to know what she was planning. Couldn't do that if we shut her down too early. Stand by. Adrian will brief you shortly. Vivian wanted to scream. Instead, she forced herself to breathe, to think clearly, to remember that she'd become someone who could handle this kind of betrayal without falling apart. She found Adrian in his office 10 minutes later, Marcus beside him reviewing surveillance footage on multiple screens. How long have you known? Vivian demanded without preamble. Adrian turned, and the guilt in his expression was answer enough. Since the second week. She reached out to 3 different rival families offering to deliver the children in exchange for territory and power. I've been feeding her false information and watching her make her moves. And you didn't tell me. I was protecting you. By lying? Vivian's voice rose despite her efforts at control. By letting me think we were building something real with her when it was all just another manipulation? I needed you to act natural around her, Adrian said quietly. If you'd known the truth, she would have sensed the change. We needed her to believe she'd fooled us completely. The logic made sense, but it didn't make the betrayal hurt less. Vivian had been used as a pawn in Adrian's counter-scheme, kept in the dark like a child rather than the partner he'd claimed to respect. When were you planning to tell me? She asked, her voice cold. When we had her completely cornered. Adrian's expression pleaded for understanding. Vivian, I know you're angry, but this was necessary. Don't you dare tell me what's necessary, Vivian interrupted. I negotiated with Irina Volkov while you were unconscious in a hospital bed. I've earned the right to be part of these decisions, not kept ignorant for the sake of your strategy. Silence fell heavy between them. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably and excused himself, leaving them alone with the weight of broken trust. Adrian crossed the room to where Vivian stood, but stopped just short of touching her. You're right. I should have trusted you with the truth. I was protecting myself, not you. Old habits. Well, break them, Vivian said sharply, because if we're going to do this, raise these children, run this empire together, I need to know you see me as an equal, not just someone to be managed and protected. I do see you as an equal, Adrian said urgently. Sometimes I see you as more than that, stronger than me, braver than me, better than I'll ever be. And that terrifies me. So I fall back on old patterns where I controlled everything and trusted no one. I'm sorry. The apology cracked something in Vivian's chest, anger draining away to leave exhaustion behind. She sagged against the desk, suddenly aware of how tired she was. Not just from this confrontation, but from months of living in constant crisis mode. What's the plan? She asked quietly. For Catherine, what happens now? We let her make her move, Adrian said. The team she's coordinating with plans to strike tomorrow night during the charity gala we're hosting. They'll try to take the children while security is focused on the event. We'll be ready for them. And Catherine, Adrian's expression went cold and hard. She chose her path. Now she lives with the consequences. Tomorrow night arrived with deceptive normalcy. The gala proceeded as planned, 200 guests mingling in the mansion's grand ballroom while a full orchestra played and champagne flowed. Vivian wore a designer gown that hid the exhaustion of new motherhood, playing the role of gracious hostess, while her mind tracked every exit, every guest who strayed too close to the private wing where the babies slept under heavy guard. Catherine was there too, elegant in vintage couture, smiling and charming the other guests like she belonged in this world. Vivian watched her and felt nothing but cold calculation. The attack came at 11 o'clock, precisely when Marcus had predicted. Armed men breached the east wing, moving toward the nursery with professional efficiency. But Adrian's people were waiting, turning the hallway into a kill zone that ended the threat in under 3 minutes. In the chaos, Vivian saw Catherine moving toward a side exit, clearly planning to escape in the confusion. She wasn't getting away. Vivian intercepted her, blocking the door with her body. Going somewhere? Catherine's mask slipped, showing calculation beneath the maternal warmth. Get out of my way, dear. This doesn't concern you. It absolutely concerns me. Those are my children you just tried to steal. I was offering them a better life. You were selling them for territory, Vivian corrected flatly. Adrian has everything recorded, every phone call, every meeting, every betrayal. It's over, Catherine. Catherine's expression hardened into something ugly. You think you've won? You're nothing, Vivian. A waitress playing dress-up in a world you'll never truly understand. Adrian will tire of you eventually, and when he does, I'll still be the mother of his children, Vivian interrupted. I'll still be the woman who built something real with him, and you'll still be the woman who abandoned her son and tried to steal her grandchildren for profit. We are not the same. Security appeared before Catherine could respond, escorting her away without ceremony. She didn't fight, didn't protest, just looked back at Vivian with something like respect in her cold eyes. Adrian found Vivian a moment later, pulling her into his arms with desperate relief. Are you all right? I'm fine. The babies? Safe. All 3 sleeping through the whole thing, thank heaven. Adrian pulled back to study her face. You confronted Catherine. She tried to run. I stopped her. Of course you did. Adrian kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. You're extraordinary. You know that? I'm learning, Vivian said. What happens to her now? Federal custody. Turns out she's wanted for fraud in 3 countries. I made a deal with the prosecutor, full cooperation, in exchange for ensuring she spends the next 20 years in a very secure prison. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Vivian just felt tired of the constant danger, the endless scheming, the parade of people who wanted to hurt them, or use them, or destroy what they were trying to build. I want out, she said quietly. Adrian went very still. Out? Not out of us. Never out of us. Vivian looked up at him, needing him to understand. But out of this life. The violence, the crime, the constant threat. I want our children to grow up without armed guards and safe rooms. I want them to have normal childhoods. Is that possible? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I've been thinking the same thing. Seeing them every day, watching you with them, realizing what we could be if we weren't constantly fighting for survival. It's made me question everything I've built. We could walk away, Vivian said, hope beginning to bloom in her chest. Sell the empire, take the money, start over somewhere safe. But it's not that simple. Men like me don't get clean exits. Then make it simple. Vivian gripped his lapels, fierce and certain. You're Adrian Blackwood. You've done impossible things before. Do one more impossible thing. Choose us over the empire. Choose family over power. Adrian's eyes searched hers, and she saw the war happening inside him. Decades of building his empire, fighting for every inch of territory, making himself into someone too dangerous to destroy. Could he really walk away from all of that? If I do this, he said slowly, if I try to extract us from this life, it will take time. Months, maybe years. And it will be dangerous. Every family we've ever competed with will see it as weakness and try to strike while we're vulnerable. Then we'll be careful. We'll be smart, and we'll survive. Vivian pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his heart beating hard beneath her palm. We've survived everything else. We can survive this too. Adrian covered her hand with his, holding it against his heart like a promise. All right, we'll do it. Together. The kiss that followed sealed more than their agreement. It sealed a future they were choosing to build, one decision at a time, one day at a time, fighting their way towards something better than the violent legacy they'd both inherited. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But as they stood together in the aftermath of Catherine's final betrayal, Vivian understood with perfect clarity that she'd found something more valuable than safety or comfort or anything else she'd once thought she needed. She'd found a partner worth fighting for, children worth protecting, and a love strong enough to survive anything their dangerous world could throw at them. That would have to be enough. The dismantling of Adrian Blackwood's criminal empire took 18 months of careful maneuvering, dangerous negotiations, and more close calls than Vivian wanted to count. But every step forward felt like reclaiming pieces of their souls from the darkness that had defined Adrian's life for so long. The first major move came 6 weeks after Catherine's arrest. Adrian called a meeting of the 5 families who controlled the eastern seaboard's underworld, gathering them in a neutral location with enough security to prevent bloodshed, but not so much that anyone felt threatened. Vivian insisted on attending despite the risk, understanding that presenting a united front was essential to making this work. She sat beside Adrian at the head of the table, Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms, while the boys remained at home under Marcus's watchful protection. The message was clear. This wasn't just business. This was about family, about legacy, about choosing a different path. Gentlemen, Adrian began, his voice carrying the command that had built his empire but now served a different purpose. I'm here to propose something unprecedented, a complete and peaceful transition of power. The room erupted in overlapping voices, confusion and suspicion written on every face. Marco Castellano, the silver-haired head of the New York syndicate, raised his hand for silence. You're retiring. His tone suggested he found this both impossible and insulting. Adrian Blackwood doesn't retire. Men like us die in office or in the street, but we don't walk away. Then I'll be the first, Adrian said calmly. I have children now. A family I actually care about protecting. The life we lead, the constant violence, the federal investigations, the risk of prison or death at every turn, that's not what I want for them. So I'm offering each of you pieces of my territory in exchange for guarantees of safe passage out of this world. Why would we negotiate when we could just take what we want once you're gone? This from Dmitry Sokolov, a younger boss with more ambition than sense. Adrian's smile was sharp and cold. Because I'm not gone yet, and if you force me to fight my way out instead of walking away peacefully, I will burn everything to the ground on my way to the exit. Every operation, every connection, every carefully constructed alliance. I'll destroy it all rather than let it fall into hostile hands. You can have an empire worth billions if you work with me, or ashes worth nothing if you try to take it by force. Choose wisely. The threat hung in the air, backed by decades of reputation that proved Adrian Blackwood always kept his promises, especially the violent ones. Marco leaned back in his chair, studying Adrian and Vivian with calculating eyes. What guarantees do we have that this isn't some elaborate trap? That you won't consolidate power while we divide your territory among ourselves? You have my word, Adrian said, and you have her. He gestured to Vivian. My wife, the mother of my children, the only person in this world I value more than power. She'll oversee the transition personally, act as neutral arbiter in any disputes. You know her reputation by now. She ended the war with Irina Volkov. She exposed Catherine's betrayal before it could succeed. She has no interest in empire building. She just wants to take our family somewhere safe and never look back. Every eye in the room turned to Vivian. She met their stares without flinching, Grace stirring slightly in her arms before settling back to sleep. It's true, Vivian said quietly. I have no stake in your territorial disputes or power plays. I just want my children to grow up without armed guards and assassination attempts. If helping facilitate this transition gets us that outcome, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure it's fair and final. The negotiations lasted 6 hours, breaking twice when tempers flared too hot and threatened to turn into violence. But eventually, slowly, an agreement took shape. Adrian's shipping operations would go to the Castellanos, the protection rackets to Sokolov's organization, the money laundering networks distributed among smaller families who'd proven themselves trustworthy over the years. In exchange, Adrian received immunity from retaliation, guaranteed safe passage for his family, and enough legitimate business interests to ensure they'd never want for money. The federal investigations would be gently redirected toward families who hadn't agreed to the peace terms, incentivizing cooperation while eliminating threats. It wasn't perfect. Several families refused to participate, choosing instead to position themselves to strike once Adrian was truly vulnerable. But the majority signed on, seeing the opportunity for expansion without the cost of all-out war. The hardest part wasn't the negotiations. It was watching Adrian systematically dismantle everything he'd built over 30 years, piece by piece, like destroying his own monument. Vivian saw the toll it took in the lines that appeared around his eyes, the way he'd stand at his office window late at night staring out at grounds he'd soon leave forever. She found him there one evening 3 months into the transition, the baby's finally asleep after a particularly fussy night. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "Second thoughts?" she asked quietly. "Every day," Adrian admitted. "I built this empire from nothing, survived things that should have killed me, made myself into someone too powerful to destroy, and now I'm voluntarily giving it all away. For something better. I hope so." Adrian turned in her arms, his expression vulnerable in the dim light. "What if I don't know how to be anything except what I've always been? What if I can't adjust to a normal life?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Vivian said. "The same way we've figured out everything else. One day at a time, one decision at a time." Adrian kissed her then, soft and searching, needing the reassurance that only she could provide. "I love you. I need you to know that, even when I'm difficult or distant or struggling with all of this." "I know," Vivian murmured against his lips, "and I love you too, even when you're being impossible. Especially when I'm being impossible. Especially then." They made love that night with desperate tenderness, clinging to each other in the darkness, reaffirming their choice with every touch and whispered word. Afterward, lying tangled together in their bed, Vivian traced the scar on Adrian's shoulder where the bullet had torn through during Irina's attack. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked. "Everything that happened to bring us here?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, his fingers drawing patterns on her bare skin. "I regret that you got hurt, that you were terrified and kidnapped and threatened. I regret that our children will grow up with stories about their father's criminal past instead of something cleaner. But do I regret meeting you, falling in love with you, building a family with you?" His arms tightened around her. "Never. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Vivian Carter, even if the road to finding you was paved with violence." "Soon to be Vivian Blackwood," she corrected. They'd scheduled the wedding for 6 months out, wanting to wait until the transition was complete and they were truly free to start their new life. "Soon to be," Adrian agreed, a smile in his voice. "You really want my name, after everything associated with it?" "I want your name because it comes with you attached. The empire I can do without. The man I'm keeping forever." The crisis that threatened to derail everything came on a cold morning in early March, when the babies were 10 months old. Vivian was feeding Grace breakfast while the boys destroyed their high chairs with enthusiastic messiness when Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "The Moretti family is backing out of the agreement. They've allied with 3 smaller operations, and they're positioning to take not just Adrian's remaining territory, but everything the other families negotiated for as well." Vivian's blood ran cold. The Morettis were old school, brutal, and commanded enough firepower to start a war that would consume everyone involved. If they were making a move now, it meant they'd been planning this betrayal from the beginning. "Where's Adrian?" "Meeting with the accountants about transferring the last of the offshore holdings. He doesn't know yet." "Don't tell him." The words came out before Vivian could second-guess them. "Let me handle this." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "With respect, Mrs. Blackwood, the Morettis don't negotiate with women?" Vivian finished. "Good. That means they'll underestimate me. Set up a meeting. Just me and Vincent Moretti. Neutral ground. Today if possible." "Adrian will lose his mind if he finds out." Adrian has spent months tearing apart his life to give us peace, Vivian interrupted. The least I can do is handle one more negotiation before we walk away. Set it up, Marcus. That's an order. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. You've come a long way from the scared woman in the clinic. I had good teachers, Vivian said. Now move, we don't have much time. But the meeting happened 6 hours later in a private room at an upscale restaurant the Morettis controlled. Vivian arrived with only 2 bodyguards, a show of confidence that bordered on recklessness. Vincent Moretti was already waiting, a man in his 60s with cold eyes and hands that had personally killed more people than Vivian wanted to imagine. Mrs. Blackwood, he greeted her with false warmth. I'm surprised Adrian sent his woman to negotiate his surrender. He didn't send me, Vivian said, taking the seat across from him without waiting for invitation. He doesn't know I'm here. This meeting is off the books. Vincent's expression sharpened with interest. Keeping secrets from your husband? How deliciously scandalous. I'm here to make you an offer, Vivian said, ignoring his attempt to rattle her. One that benefits you far more than breaking the peace agreement and starting a war you might not survive. Bold words from someone with no army. I don't need an army. I have information. Vivian pulled a manila envelope from her bag and slid it across the table. Open it. Vincent did, his expression shifting from amusement to shock to barely contained fury as he reviewed the contents. Financial records showing his son's embezzlement, photographs of meetings with federal agents, evidence of betrayals that would destroy Vincent's credibility with his own organization. Where did you get this? His voice was dangerously quiet. Adrian spent 30 years building the most extensive intelligence network on the East Coast. When he decided to retire, that network didn't disappear. It just got repurposed. We've been monitoring every family involved in the transition, including yours. Insurance, in case anyone got greedy. This is blackmail. This is business, Vivian corrected. You honor the agreement, I destroy these files and never mention what they contain. You break the agreement, I send copies to everyone who matters in your organization and watch it tear itself apart from the inside. Your choice. Vincent stared at her with open hatred. You have no idea what you're playing with. The Morettis have been in this business for 4 generations, and Adrian Blackwood dominated this business for 30 years with nothing but intelligence and ruthlessness. I learned from the best. Vivian leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to honor the peace agreement. You're going to call off whatever alliance you've been building. And you're going to spread the word that anyone who comes after the Blackwood family, once we've retired, will answer not just to Adrian, but to every family who wants this transition to succeed peacefully. Because make no mistake, if you start this war, everyone loses. The federal heat will be unbearable. Territories will be contested for years. And the profit margins everyone's been enjoying will evaporate overnight. Is your pride really worth that much destruction? The silence stretched between them, thick with tension, and barely contained violence. Finally, Vincent shoved the envelope back across the table. You're more like him than anyone realizes, he said, something almost like respect in his voice. Fine. The agreement stands. But if you ever threaten me or my family again, you won't need to worry about that, Vivian interrupted. In 6 months, we'll be gone, and you'll never hear from us again. That's the whole point of this exercise. She stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. My children's safety is the only thing I care about more than my own life. If anything happens to them, if someone takes a shot, plants a bomb, even makes a credible threat, I will hunt down everyone responsible and their entire bloodline. Adrian taught me mercy is weakness in this world. I choose to be weak only as long as you choose to be smart. Remember that. Vivian walked out without waiting for a response, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She made it to the car before her hands started shaking, reaction setting in now that the adrenaline was fading. Marcus, who'd been waiting by the vehicle, took one look at her face and handed her a bottle of water. You okay? I just threatened a man who's killed people for looking at him wrong. No, I'm not okay. Vivian drank deeply, trying to calm her racing pulse. But the meeting went well. Adrian's going to kill me for letting you do this. Adrian's going to thank you for preventing a war. Vivian took another drink, then met Marcus's eyes. Did you really think I couldn't handle it? No, ma'am, Marcus said with a slight smile. I knew exactly how you'd handle it. That's why I set up the meeting. When Adrian found out what she'd done, and he found out within 3 hours because apparently Marcus's loyalty only went so far, the explosion was spectacular. He stormed into their bedroom where Vivian was changing Grace's diaper, his face flushed with fury and fear in equal measure. "You met with Vincent Moretti alone? Are you insane?" "I had bodyguards." "2 bodyguards against the Moretti family is nothing." Adrian's hands clenched into fists. "He could have killed you, taken you hostage, used you against me to extract concessions." "But he didn't," Vivian interrupted calmly, finishing with Grace and lifting her daughter onto her hip. "Because I gave him a better option than violence, the same way you've been doing for 30 years. That's different. I can protect myself. And I can't?" Vivian's voice sharpened. "After everything we've been through, after every crisis I've navigated, you still see me as someone who needs protecting rather than someone who can stand beside you as an equal?" Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it, seeming to actually hear what she was saying. His shoulders slumped slightly. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. You've proven yourself 100 times over. When Marcus told me where you'd gone, all I could think about was losing you. Again, the fear makes me stupid." Vivian crossed to him, Grace babbling happily between them. "I know, but you have to trust that I can take care of myself, that I can take care of us. We're partners, remember? That goes both ways." Adrian pulled them both into his arms, careful of Grace's squirming form. "Partners," he agreed, "even when it terrifies me. Especially when it terrifies you." The final months of the transition proceeded smoothly after that, the Moretti situation serving as a warning to other families who might have been considering similar betrayals. Adrian liquidated his remaining criminal assets, converting everything into legitimate investments and offshore accounts that would fund their new life. The mansion went on the market, selling within a week to a tech billionaire who had no idea about its violent history. They chose a small coastal town in Northern California for their fresh start, far from the East Coast power structures and familiar faces. The house they bought was nothing like the mansion, just a comfortable 4-bedroom with a yard big enough for the children to play and views of the ocean that made Vivian's heart ache with unexpected peace. The wedding happened on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, 2 weeks before they left the East Coast forever. Just immediate family, which meant the babies, Marcus, who'd agreed to relocate with them as head of personal security, and a handful of people who'd proven themselves loyal through everything. No crime bosses, no power plays, no hidden agendas. Just 2 people who'd survived impossible odds, choosing to build something beautiful from the wreckage. Vivian wore a simple white dress that moved in the ocean breeze, her hair loose around her shoulders. Adrian stood at the makeshift altar in a dark suit, his eyes bright with emotion as she walked toward him carrying Grace while Marcus shepherded the boys. The officiant was a retired judge who owed Adrian a favor but asked no questions about their past. The ceremony was brief and perfect, vows exchanged with shaking voices and trembling hands, promises made that meant everything because they'd already been tested in fire and blood. "I promise to choose you every day," Vivian said when it was her turn, tears streaming down her face. "In peace and in chaos, in joy and in fear. You gave me a family when I thought I'd lost everything. You showed me I was stronger than I ever imagined. And you loved me fiercely even when I gave you every reason not to. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking that first chance on a nobody waitress at a wedding reception." Adrian's voice was rough with emotion when he responded. "I promise to be the man you deserve, not the man I was forced to become. To put family before power, love before legacy. You saw humanity in me when everyone else just saw a monster. You gave me hope for a future I never thought possible. And you stand beside me as an equal even when I forget to treat you like one. I will spend the rest of my life proving that choosing you was the best decision I ever made." The kiss when they were pronounced married was gentle and devastating, weighted with everything they'd survived and everything they were choosing to become. Grace clapped her tiny hands between them, delighted by the attention, while the boys made grabby motions toward the cake that had been set up nearby. The reception was small and perfect, held in the backyard of their soon-to-be former mansion with string lights and music that had nothing to do with power or danger. Vivian danced with Adrian as the sun set, her head on his shoulder, feeling more at peace than she'd ever felt in her life. "No regrets?" she asked softly. "Only that it took so long to figure out what actually mattered. Adrian murmured against her hair. But we're here now. That's what counts. The move to California happened 3 days later. They drove across the country in a convoy of SUVs loaded with belongings and children, taking the long route to avoid major cities, stopping at roadside diners and cheap motels like a normal family on a normal road trip. The babies loved it, fascinated by the changing landscapes outside the windows, while Vivian and Adrian slowly learned to breathe without constantly watching for threats. Their new home felt surreal at first. Quiet mornings without armed security patrols, afternoons spent at parks without scanning for assassins, evenings cooking dinner together while the babies played on the kitchen floor. Adrian struggled the most with the adjustment, used to constant crisis and strategic planning, finding himself adrift without an empire to command. But slowly, carefully, he learned to be just a father and husband instead of a feared crime lord. He took James and Lucas to their first swimming lessons, patient and encouraging even when they cried and clung to him in fear of the water. He walked Grace around the neighborhood in her stroller, pointing out birds and flowers with the same intensity he'd once devoted to territorial disputes. He made Vivian breakfast in bed on lazy Sunday mornings, learning to express love through small gestures instead of grand protective gestures. Vivian watched him transform and fell in love with him all over again. This version of Adrian who smiled more easily, who didn't flinch at unexpected sounds, who could hold his children without constantly calculating threat assessments. She transformed too, finding purpose in ways she'd never expected. She started a foundation that helped women escape dangerous situations, domestic violence, human trafficking, crushing debt, giving them the resources and support to rebuild their lives. It was funded by Adrian's legitimate businesses, but run entirely by Vivian, pouring her experience surviving impossible odds into helping others do the same. The first woman she helped was a single mother with 2 kids, drowning in medical debt and working 3 jobs to stay afloat. Vivian saw herself in that exhausted face, remembered the desperation that had driven her to a clinic to end a pregnancy she couldn't afford. She gave the woman enough money to pay off the debt, connected her with job training programs, and set up a trust fund for the children's education. "Why are you doing this?" the woman asked, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the check that represented more money than she'd see in 5 years of work. "Because someone gave me a chance when I needed it most," Vivian said simply, "and because no one should have to choose between survival and dignity." The foundation grew quickly, expanding to help hundreds of women over the following years. It gave Vivian's life meaning beyond just being Adrian's wife or the children's mother, though those roles remained the most important parts of her identity. The children thrived in their new environment. James grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and asked questions about everything. Lucas was pure energy, always moving, always exploring, needing constant supervision to keep him from climbing trees he couldn't safely get down from. And Grace was the perfect combination of both parents, with Vivian's stubbornness and Adrian's strategic mind, already manipulating her brothers into doing what she wanted at age 2. They attended normal preschool, played with neighborhood kids who had no idea their father had once been one of the most feared criminals on the East Coast. They were just the Blackwood kids, rambunctious and sweet and loved beyond measure. Life wasn't perfect. Adrian still had nightmares sometimes about the violence of his past, waking in cold sweats with Vivian's name on his lips. Vivian occasionally found herself scanning crowds for threats that no longer existed, habits from their dangerous months that proved hard to break. And they both knew that complete safety was an illusion. People from Adrian's former life still existed, still remembered, still might someday decide that old grudges mattered more than peace agreements. But they were happy. Genuinely, impossibly happy in ways neither had imagined possible when their relationship began with kidnapping and coercion. The threat they'd always feared came on Grace's 3rd birthday. They were having a party in their backyard, nothing elaborate, just neighborhood families and the simple joy of children playing games and eating too much cake. Vivian was helping Grace blow out candles when Marcus appeared at her elbow, his expression grim. "We have a situation. Someone's been watching the house. Professional surveillance, multiple angles. They know we're here." Vivian's blood turned to ice, even as she kept smiling for the children's benefit. "How long?" "At least 3 days. We only caught them this morning when they got sloppy." "Adrian knows?" "He's handling it. Wants you to keep the party going like nothing's wrong. Don't want to spook whoever's watching." Vivian nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. This was what they'd prepared for, what part of her had always known was coming. You didn't walk away from Adrian's world without eventually having to answer for it. She made it through the rest of the party on autopilot, smiling and chatting with other parents while her mind calculated exit strategies and threat assessments. When the last guest finally left, she found Adrian in his office, surrounded by surveillance photos and grim-faced security personnel. "It's the Kozlov family," he said without preamble. "Small-time operators out of Boston. They're claiming I killed their father during a territory dispute 15 years ago, and they're here for revenge." "Are they right? Did you kill their father?" "Probably. I killed a lot of people back then." Adrian's expression was haunted. "I thought we'd covered all the loose ends, paid off everyone who mattered, but I guess some grudges run deeper than money." "What do they want?" "What everyone wants, blood for blood. They're going to try to take the children, use them as leverage to force me into a confrontation." The words hit Vivian like a physical blow. "No, absolutely not. We end this now." "I'm working on it." "No, Adrian, you don't understand." Vivian's voice was steel. "We didn't sacrifice everything, rebuild our entire lives, just to have some bottom-feeder family threaten our children because of decisions you made 15 years ago. We end this permanently, tonight." Adrian studied her face, reading the determination there. "What are you proposing?" "A final negotiation. One last time, we remind the criminal underworld why nobody with any sense messes with the Blackwood family. And then we make it clear, crystal clear, that this life is over. Anyone who comes after us, our children, or the peace we've built gets destroyed so completely that it serves as a warning for generations. You want to negotiate from a position of strength we no longer have, don't we?" Vivian pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts. "We still have allies. Marco Castellano owes us for the favorable territory split. Dmitry Sokolov's empire would have collapsed without the connections we left him. Even Vincent Moretti respects the peace we built. One call to each of them, explaining that the Kozlov family is threatening to destabilize everything by breaking the retirement agreement, and will have more firepower backing us than the Kozlovs could ever survive." Adrian's expression shifted from concern to something like pride. "You're proposing we use the same power structure I spent months dismantling to defend the peace it created." "Exactly. The Kozlovs are small-time. They only moved because they thought we were weak and alone. We remind them, and everyone else watching, that we're neither. And then we make the cost of breaking the peace so catastrophic that no one will ever try it again." Adrian pulled her into his arms, kissing her hard and fierce. "You're absolutely terrifying. You know that? I learned from the best." The calls went out that night. By morning, representatives from 5 major crime families had arrived in their quiet California town, an unprecedented show of force that made the local police nervous, but didn't result in any actual violence. The message was clear. The Blackwood family was protected not by Adrian's past reputation, but by the current power structure's investment in maintaining the peace they'd negotiated. The meeting with the Kozlovs happened in a warehouse Marcus had secured, neutral ground surrounded by enough firepower to start a small war. Vivian insisted on attending despite Adrian's objections, understanding that her presence sent its own message. The Kozlov brothers were younger than Vivian expected, mid-30s with hard eyes and the desperate edge of men who'd built their courage on rage rather than strategy. The eldest, Alexei, did the talking. "Adrian Blackwood, we've been looking for you." "You found me," Adrian said calmly. "Now what?" "Now you pay for what you did to our father. Blood for blood, like the old ways." "The old ways are dead," Vivian said before Adrian could respond. "We're living in a new world now, one where grudges from 15 years ago don't justify threatening innocent children." Alexei's gaze flickered to her with contempt. "This doesn't concern you, woman. I'm his wife. I'm the mother of those children you were planning to kidnap. It absolutely concerns me." Vivian stepped forward, putting herself between Adrian and the Kozlov brothers. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk away from this vendetta. You're going to return to Boston and build your organization without ever mentioning the Blackwood name again. And in exchange, we don't activate the kill orders we've already distributed to every family represented in this room." "Kill orders?" Alexei's laugh was nervous. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Vivian gestured to the family's representatives standing around the warehouse perimeter. Marco, what were your instructions if the Kozlovs refused to see reason? Marco Castellano stepped forward, his expression grave. Eliminate the entire Kozlov organization within 72 hours. Leave no one alive who might continue the vendetta. Dmitri? Vivian continued. Same orders, Sokolov confirmed. The peace agreement includes provisions for dealing with families who threaten it. The Kozlovs activated those provisions when they came after the Blackwoods. Alexei's face had gone pale, finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd stumbled into. We just wanted justice. You wanted revenge, Adrian interrupted. There's a difference. Justice would be accepting that your father made choices that got him killed in a world where violence is currency. Revenge is threatening my children because you're too small to hurt me directly. You chose revenge. Now you deal with the consequences. Unless you choose differently, Vivian added. Right here, right now, walk away. Build your business. Live your lives. We'll never think about you again. But if you persist, if you make one more move toward us or our family, every person in this room will make it their mission to erase the Kozlov name from existence. No second chances. No negotiations. Just complete and total destruction. The silence that followed was absolute. Vivian watched the calculation happen in Alexei's eyes, pride warring with survival instinct, rage struggling against the cold reality of being outmatched and outmaneuvered. Finally, he nodded. We'll leave. But if you ever come back to that life, if you ever rebuild your empire, we won't, Adrian said with finality. That part of my life is over. This meeting is the last time I activate those old connections. After this, we're just a normal family living a quiet life. You have my word. And if your word means nothing, then you'll have plenty of company in whatever revenge fantasy you're nurturing, Adrian said coldly, because half the families here would love an excuse to eliminate competitors. I'm the only thing stopping them from using your threat as justification. Walk away while you still can. The Kozlovs left without further argument, disappearing back to Boston, and according to Marcus's later reports, never speaking the Blackwood name again. The message had been received loud and clear. The retired crime lord and his family were off limits, protected by the very power structure they'd helped establish. But Vivian knew this couldn't happen again. They'd been lucky this time, but luck eventually ran out. We need insurance, she told Adrian that night after the children were asleep and they were finally alone. Something that guarantees no one ever tries this again. What did you have in mind? Vivian pulled out a laptop, opening files she'd been compiling for months. Every family we negotiated with during the transition, I kept records. Not blackmail material like with the Morettis, just detailed documentation of the agreements, the territories transferred, the promises made, a complete accounting of how the current power structure came to exist. And I'm going to publish it. Not everywhere, just in places where it matters. Encrypted files sent to federal investigators with instructions to open them only if something happens to our family. The same files sent to rival organizations who'd love to know exactly how their competitors gained power. Everyone stays peaceful because everyone has something to lose if the peace breaks. Mutually assured destruction, but with information instead of violence. Adrian stared at her, something like awe in his expression. You're creating a deterrent that doesn't require us to maintain any power at all. If we die or disappear, everyone's secrets get exposed and the whole carefully constructed power balance collapses. Exactly. They protect us because protecting us protects themselves. And we get to actually live our lives without constantly waiting for the next threat. It's brilliant. Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and terrifying, and absolutely perfect. When did you become smarter than me? I was always smarter than you, Vivian teased. You just had better weapons. The insurance policy went into effect within a week, carefully crafted and distributed to ensure maximum impact. The response from the criminal underworld was exactly what Vivian had predicted, quiet acceptance mixed with grudging respect. The Blackwood family became truly untouchable, not through violence but through strategic positioning that made them more valuable alive and peaceful than dead or disrupted. And finally, wonderfully, they were free. The years that followed were the happiest of Vivian's life. She watched her children grow into remarkable people. James with his quiet wisdom and love of learning, Lucas with his boundless energy and fearless spirit, Grace with her strategic mind and fierce loyalty to her brothers. They knew nothing of their father's past beyond vague mentions of business that Adrian had left behind before they were born. Adrian transformed completely into the man Vivian had always known existed beneath the crime lord exterior. He coached Lucas's soccer team with the same intensity he'd once brought to territory negotiations. He helped James with science projects that got more elaborate each year. He taught Grace to play chess, delighting in her natural talent for strategy while carefully steering her toward using those skills for good, rather than manipulation. And he loved Vivian with a devotion that never wavered, never dulled, never took for granted the miracle of building something beautiful from such violent beginnings. On their 10th anniversary, Adrian took Vivian back to the cliff where they'd been married, leaving the children with Marcus for a rare night alone together. They stood watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson, his arms wrapped around her from behind, both of them older and happier and so far removed from the people they'd been when they first met. "Do you ever miss it?" Vivian asked quietly. "The power, the empire, the feeling of controlling everything around you?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the certainty of it, knowing exactly who I was and what I was capable of. But then I go home to you and the children, and I realize I traded one kind of power for something infinitely more valuable. The power to shape young lives, to build a family, to love and be loved without agenda or manipulation. I wouldn't go back to that old life for anything in the world. Even though it nearly killed us both multiple times. Even though." Adrian turned her in his arms, cupping her face in his hands. "You were right that night in my office when you said we could bend instead of breaking. We survived the worst this world could throw at us, and we came out stronger on the other side. That's a different kind of power. The power of resilience, of choosing love over legacy, of building something that actually matters." Vivian kissed him as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, sealing the promise they'd made to each other a decade earlier. They'd survived impossible odds, defeated enemies, overcame betrayals, and transformed themselves from broken people into partners who'd built a life worth living. Behind them, their children's laughter drifted up from the house where Marcus was supervising an evening that probably involved too much ice cream and definitely too much chaos. It was the sound of normalcy, of safety, of the future they'd fought so hard to create. "Come on," Vivian said, taking Adrian's hand. "Let's go home." And together, they walked back toward the light and warmth and beautiful chaos of the family they'd built from ashes and determination and a love strong enough to survive anything. The empire was gone. The danger was past. The violence was behind them. What remained was everything that actually mattered. 3 incredible children, a love that had been tested in fire and proven unbreakable, and a future bright with possibility instead of shadowed by threat. Vivian Carter, once a struggling waitress drowning in debt, now stood as Vivian Blackwood, wife, mother, philanthropist, and the woman who'd tamed the East Coast's most dangerous crime lord by showing him there was more to life than power and control. Adrian Blackwood, once feared by everyone who knew his name, now lived as a father who attended school plays and soccer games, a husband who still looked at his wife like she hung the stars, and a man who discovered that the greatest empire he could ever build was the family sleeping safely under his roof. They'd found grace in the chaos, just like their daughter's name promised, and they'd survived together to enjoy it, one beautiful, ordinary day at a time.